The sand wasn't right. Mark Spector had awakened in deserts before, Afghanistan, Egypt, the Sudanese border, but this one felt wrong. The grains were too coarse, the color too pale, and the sun. The sun hung in a sky that seemed slightly too violet at the edges. He pushed himself up from where he'd been lying face down, spitting grit from his mouth, and tried to remember how he'd gotten here. You walked through the circle of stars, my fist. Khonshu's voice rattled through his skull like bones in a cup. Mark winced, pressing his palm against his temple. The last thing he remembered was pursuing a cult in Cairo, worshippers of some forgotten deity, who'd been trafficking artifacts. He'd cornered them in a warehouse near the old city, and then a ring. A massive stone ring covered in symbols that had begun to glow. They activated a gateway, a door between worlds. And I, being curious about what lay beyond, compelled you through. You compelled me? Mark growled, staggering to his feet. His white suit was torn and stained with sand. The crescent darts on his belt were still there, as was the truncheon strapped to his thigh. Small mercies. Where the hell are we? A place of false gods, Mark Spector. Can you not feel them? Their stench pollutes this world. Mark's hand went to his chest, where the scarab amulet rested beneath his shirt. The metal was cold, which meant Khonshu was agitated. The god of the moon and vengeance rarely got agitated unless there was someone who needed punishing. He scanned the desert around him. Ruins jutted from the sand about 100 yards away, stone structures that looked vaguely Egyptian but wrong, like someone had copied the architecture from memory and gotten the proportions skewed. A pyramid, but the angles were too steep. Hieroglyphs, but the symbols were unfamiliar. Then he heard the screaming. Mark's body moved before his mind caught up, muscle memory from his mercenary days taking over. He sprinted toward the ruins, cape billowing behind him, and crested a dune to see a nightmare unfolding below. A group of humans, at least 20, were on their knees in the sand, hands bound behind their backs. Standing over them were soldiers in armor that Mark had never seen before, metallic, segmented, with helmets that concealed their faces entirely. They carried weapons that looked like twisted staffs. And as Mark watched, one of them aimed his weapon at a kneeling woman. The staff's head split open like a flower, revealing an energy core that began to glow orange. Mark didn't think. He threw. The crescent dart whistled through the air and embedded itself in the soldier's wrist. The staff weapon discharged wild, the energy bolt scorching sand instead of flesh. The soldier roared, a sound that was somehow metallic and organic at once, and turned toward Mark. That's when Mark saw the symbiote. The soldier's helmet retracted, revealing a human face twisted in fury. But more horrifying was the serpentine creature that emerged from a pouch in the armor at his belly. It reared up, hissing, its eyes glowing with the same orange light as the staff weapon. Jaffa, Khonshu whispered with something like satisfaction. Slaves of the false gods. Kill them all. Working on it, Mark muttered. He charged down the dune as the other soldiers, Jaffa, apparently, turned their weapons toward him. Energy bolts seared the air around him, superheating sand into glass. Mark jinked left, then right, his white cape making him a dancing ghost in the desert heat. He closed the distance to the nearest Jaffa and drove his truncheon into the creature in the soldier's belly. The symbiote shrieked and retracted. The Jaffa staggered, suddenly weakened, and Mark swept his legs out from under him. The soldier hit the sand hard, and Mark snatched up the fallen staff weapon, examining it for a split second before figuring out the trigger mechanism. He aimed at the next Jaffa and fired. The recoil nearly tore the weapon from his hands, but the energy bolt caught the soldier in the chest and sent him flying backward. Armor smoking. Mark grinned beneath his mask. He could work with this. The fight became a blur. Mark moved like Khonshu's own shadow, using the staff weapon until it overheated, then switching to his crescent darts, then to brutal hand-to-hand combat when the Jaffa tried to surround him. These soldiers were trained, disciplined, but they weren't prepared for someone who fought like a man with nothing to lose because Mark Spector had lost everything that mattered a long time ago. When the last Jaffa fell, Mark stood among the bodies, chest heaving, white suit now splattered with blood and sand. The prisoners stared at him with a mixture of terror and awe. One of them, an older man with a scarred face, spoke in a language Mark didn't recognize. They thank you, Khonshu translated. They call you a warrior of the gods. Tell them to run, Mark said. Get as far from here as. The shimmer in the air made him spin around, staff weapon raised. The ruins behind him began to glow with the same symbols he'd seen on the ring in Cairo. And then, impossible as it seemed, the stone ring embedded in the largest structure roared to life. Water, or something, that looked like water, exploded outward from the ring's center, then stabilized into a shimmering vertical pool. Mark stared at it, transfixed, as four figures emerged from the impossible surface, weapons raised. They wore military uniforms, American, if Mark's eye for tactical gear was correct, but their weapons were a mix of Earth firearms and alien technology. The leader, a man with graying hair and a colonel's insignia, took one look at the bodies, the freed prisoners, and Mark standing in the center of it all in his blood-stained white suit and cape. Well, the colonel said, lowering his weapon slightly but not holstering it. That's new. A woman with short blonde hair, captain's bars, kept her rifle trained on Mark. Sir, he's wearing a cape. I can see that. Carter, a younger man with glasses and a more academic bearing, stepped forward, staring at Mark with undisguised fascination. The symbology on his costume. It's Egyptian, lunar iconography, but the design is contemporary, or at least post-1900s based on the material composition. I can see from here. Daniel, not the time, the colonel said. The fourth member of their team, a massive man with a gold emblem on his forehead, studied Mark with dark, calculating eyes. He has slain Jaffa. Many Jaffa. Alone. Mark lowered the staff weapon slowly, hands visible. I don't know who you are, he said carefully, but I'm guessing you're not with these armored freaks. That depends, the colonel replied. Who are you and how did you get here? Mark considered lying. Stephen would have lied. Stephen Grant, the millionaire philanthropist personality, was good at social engineering. Jake would have already started planning an escape route. But Mark Spector, the mercenary, the broken man who served a god he wasn't sure was real or just another voice in his fractured mind, decided on honesty. My name is Mark Spector, he said, pulling off his mask to reveal his sweat-soaked face. But most people call me Moon Knight. And as for how I got here, he looked back at the shimmering ring. I walked through one of those things in Cairo about 10 minutes ago. Now somebody want to tell me what planet I'm on. The four strangers exchanged glances. The colonel sighed and lowered his weapon completely. Well, Mr. Knight, he said, this just became a really weird day. I'm Colonel Jack O'Neill. That's O'Neill with 2 L's. Welcome to P3X 888. And you're about to have a very interesting conversation with General Hammond. Good, Khonshu purred in Mark's mind. Let us meet these people who guard the gateways between worlds. Let us see if they know what true gods look like. Mark pulled his mask back on and followed them toward the ring. Behind him, the freed prisoners scattered into the desert, already telling stories of the white warrior who had fallen from the sky to deliver them from the servants of the false gods. The legend of Moon Knight in the Stargate universe had begun. The journey through the Stargate was like drowning in frozen lightning. Mark felt his body unmade and remade in the span of a heartbeat. Every atom scattered across impossible distances before being reassembled on the other side. When he stumbled out onto the metal ramp, he fell to his knees, gasping, while Conch's laughter echoed through his skull. Magnificent. A doorway that tears apart flesh and spirit, then rebuilds them elsewhere. Oh, Mark, what wonders this universe holds. Wonderful, Mark muttered, forcing himself upright. His hand went to his chest, checking that the scarab was still there. Everything seemed intact, though his nerve endings were screaming. He looked up and froze. The room was massive, a missile silo converted into something else entirely. The Stargate dominated the space, a ring of symbols identical to the one on P3X 888, but housed in concrete and steel. Technicians worked at computer stations along the walls. Soldiers with automatic weapons stood at attention, all of them now staring at the man in the white cape, who'd just arrived with SG-1. Stand down, O'Neill called out. He's with us. Sort of. The woman, Carter, spoke into a radio. Stargate Command, this is SG-1. We have an unexpected guest. Recommend medical and security teams to the gate room. Negative on medical, Mark said, straightening to his full height. I'm fine. You just fought 12 Jaffa by yourself, the academic Daniel. O'Neill had called him, said, adjusting his glasses. You should be dead. Mark touched his ribs where a staff blast had grazed him. The suit was scorched, but beneath it, his skin was already healing. The burn fading to pink, then nothing. Conch's gift. One of many. I'm hard to kill, he said simply. The large man with the gold emblem, who'd been silent during the trip back, stepped closer. I am TLC. You fought with honor, Moon Knight. But you also fought with a fury I have seen, only in those consumed by madness or divine purpose. His eyes narrowed. Which are you? Mark met his gaze steadily. Both, probably. An alarm klaxon made everyone tense. The Stargate began to activate again, symbols locking into place with heavy clunks. The water-like surface exploded outward, then stabilized. Unscheduled off-world activation. A voice called over the intercom. Close the iris. A massive metal barrier slid across the Stargates, opening just as something slammed into it from the other side. The impact echoed through the gate room like a thunderclap. Then another, and another. Jaffa, TLC said grimly. They followed our IDC signature. They're trying to break through, Carter said, studying a tablet. But the iris is holding. Mark watched the impacts, fascinated and horrified. What stops them from just materializing inside that metal thing? Physics, Carter replied. The iris sits close enough to the event horizon that anything trying to reintegrate gets, well, atomized. Effective, Mark said. The pounding stopped. The Stargate disengaged with a whoosh of energy, and silence filled the room. O'Neill exhaled. Okay, now medical and security. And someone get General Hammond down here. We've got a lot of explaining to do. 20 minutes later, Mark sat in an interrogation room that was trying very hard not to look like an interrogation room. The chairs were comfortable. Someone had brought him water. But the mirror on one wall was obviously two-way, and the door was guarded by 2 Air Force security personnel with sidearms. Mark had been in rooms like this before, usually on the other side of the interrogation. They fear you, Khonshu observed. Good. Fear is the beginning of wisdom. They should fear you, Mark muttered. You're the one who dragged me through that thing. The door opened. O'Neill entered first, followed by the rest of his team and an older man in an Air Force general's uniform. The general had the bearing of someone who'd seen too much to be easily surprised, but his eyes lingered on Mark's white suit and cape with undisguised curiosity. Mr. Spector, the general said, taking a seat across from him. I'm Major General George Hammond, commanding officer of Stargate Command. Before we begin, I need to establish something. Are you a threat to this facility or its personnel? Mark considered the question. Stephen wanted to charm them. Jake wanted to find the exits. But Mark Spector answered honestly. Not unless you worship false gods or prey on the innocent, he said. Then we'd have a problem. Hammond's eyebrow raised slightly. False gods. That's what Khonshu calls them. The things those Jaffa soldiers serve. Daniel leaned forward eagerly. Khonshu, the Egyptian god of the moon, vengeance, and travelers at night. One of the Ennead. He looked at Mark intently. You're claiming to serve an Egyptian deity? I'm not claiming anything, Mark said flatly. I do serve him. Whether that makes me blessed or crazy is a matter of perspective. Little of column A, little of column B, O'Neill suggested. Mark smiled without humor. Something like that. Carter pulled out a tablet. According to the medical scan we ran, while you were unconscious from the gate travel, I wasn't unconscious. Your physiology shows several anomalies. Accelerated healing, increased bone density, neural patterns consistent with. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Multiple distinct personality matrices. The room went quiet. Mark's jaw tightened. Dissociative identity disorder, he said. I'm aware. Mark Spector, mercenary. Stephen Grant, millionaire. Jake Lockley, cab driver. And Khonshu, who may or may not be a separate entity or just another part of my fractured psyche. He met their stares without flinching. I've made my peace with it. Have you? TLC asked quietly. Or do you simply endure? The question hit harder than Mark expected. He looked at the Jaffa warrior, seeing something in those eyes that understood burden and duty. Both, Mark admitted. Hammond cleared his throat. Dr. Jackson, you seem to have insights into this. Khonshu, Daniel nodded enthusiastically. The gold, the false gods. Moon Knight encountered, often pose as earth deities. Ra, Apophis, Hathor, Osiris. They use sarcophagi and genetic memory to impersonate gods from human mythology. He looked at Mark. But I've never heard of a Goa'uld claiming to be Khonshu. The lunar gods were never as prominent in their pantheon. Because I am real, you blind worm, Khonshu snarled in Mark's mind. I am not some parasitic eel wearing a crown. I am the true fist of Khonshu, and these pretenders will know my wrath. Mark winced, pressing his fingers to his temple. Khonshu wants me to tell you that he's real and very offended by the comparison to parasitic eels. O'Neill blinked. The voice in your head is talking to you right now. Always, Mark said tiredly. He never shuts up. Must be exhausting, Carter said, and there was genuine sympathy in her voice. You have no idea. Hammond stood, hands clasped behind his back. Mr. Spectre, we have a situation. You've entered a classified military facility through an alien device. Under normal circumstances, you'd be detained indefinitely for security reasons. He paused. However, these are not normal circumstances. You saved a village from Goa'uld forces. You demonstrated combat capabilities that frankly beggar belief. And according to Dr. Jackson, you may have knowledge of Earth, mythology that could prove valuable in our fight against the Goa'uld. Mark straightened. You're fighting them? The false gods. For the past 7 years, O'Neill said. It's been a hell of a time. 7 years, Khonshu mused. These mortals have waged war against the pretenders for 7 years. And still the false gods persist. They need a true instrument of divine justice. Khonshu says you need help, Mark translated. We could use another good soldier, Hammond admitted. But I need to know, can you follow orders? Can you work as part of a team? Or are you going to go rogue the moment your god tells you to? Mark looked at each of them in turn. O'Neill, the cynical soldier hiding idealism beneath sarcasm. Carter, the brilliant scientist warrior. Daniel, the scholar searching for truth. TLC, the warrior seeking redemption for a lifetime serving false masters. They reminded him of the Midnight Suns, in a way. Broken people fighting impossible battles because someone had to. I can follow orders, Mark said slowly. As long as those orders don't violate my mission. And what is your mission? Hammond asked. Mark stood, cape settling around his shoulders. To protect those who travel by night. To punish those who prey on the innocent. And now, apparently, to help you tear down every false god that claims dominion over humanity. TLC's expression didn't change, but something like approval flickered in his eyes. A worthy goal. O'Neill looked at Hammond. Sir, permission to speak freely? Granted. This is insane, but we've worked with weirder. And if he can take down 12 Jaffa solo, I want him on our side when things get ugly. Hammond was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Provisional authorization, he said. You'll undergo a full psychological evaluation, weapons training with our equipment, and briefings on the Goa'uld threat. You'll be assigned to SG-1 under Colonel O'Neill's supervision. One wrong move, and you're confined to quarters. Understood. Mark extended his hand. Understood, General. Hammond shook it. Welcome to Stargate Command, Mr. Spectre. God help us all. Finally, Khonshu purred. Now the real work begins. The briefing room had become Mark's prison for the past 6 hours. Dr. Janet Fraser, the chief medical officer, had finished her psychological evaluation an hour ago with a concerned expression and a prescription for sleep medication that Mark had politely declined. Now he sat across from Daniel Jackson, who had spread dozens of photographs, documents, and artifacts across the table, all bearing symbols Mark recognized from a lifetime of serving an Egyptian god. This is a reproduction of a tablet we recovered from Abydos, Daniel said, pointing to an image of hieroglyphs. It shows Ra's arrival through the Chopper AI, the Stargate, thousands of years ago. The Goa'uld posed as gods to primitive humans, using advanced technology to cement their power. Mark studied the symbols, and something cold settled in his chest. The hieroglyphs weren't quite right. They had the shape of Egyptian writing but lacked the soul of it. Like a forgery done by someone who understood the mechanics, but not the meaning. Desecration, Khonshu hissed. They stole our names, our symbols, our worship. And for this, they will suffer eternally. These aren't just imposters, Mark said quietly. They're parasites wearing the skin of real gods. Daniel nodded eagerly. Exactly. The Goa'uld are a symbiotic species. They're the creatures you saw inside the Jaffa soldiers. They implant themselves in human hosts, taking complete control. The hosts remain aware but powerless, trapped in their own bodies while the gold uses them. Mark's hands clenched into fists. How many? Hosts? Billions, probably, across thousands of worlds. No. Mark's voice was flat. How many gold have taken the names of Egyptian gods? Daniel pulled out another folder. RA, as I mentioned. Apophis, who leads one of the most powerful System Lord factions. Osiris and Isis, though we believe Isis is dead. Hathor, who we encountered and eliminated. Anubis, who? He paused, seeing Mark's expression. What? Anubis, Mark repeated. The name felt like poison on his tongue. They took Anubis? You know him? Mark stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the gate room below. Anubis is the guardian of the dead, the weigher of hearts. He judges whether souls are worthy of the afterlife. Mark struggled for words. He's important to Khonshu. They're connected in the Egyptian pantheon. Connected? Khonshu's voice was molten rage. He is my brother in purpose, my equal in judgment. And these worms dare wear his name like a costume? Find him, Mark. Find this false Anubis and tear out his spine. Khonshu wants him dead, Mark said. Daniel exchanged a glance with TLC, who had been standing silently in the corner throughout the briefing. Anubis is extremely dangerous, the Jaffa warriors said. He was banished by the system lords for crimes so terrible. Even they could not tolerate them. But he has returned, more powerful than before. Half ascended, wielding technology that should not exist. Half ascended. Mark turned back to them. There are beings of pure energy called the Ancients, Daniel explained. They've evolved beyond physical form. Anubis found a way to partially ascend while retaining his physical body and gold symbiote. He's essentially become a god in truth, not just pretense. The irony wasn't lost on Mark. A false god had achieved actual godhood through cheating. We need to show you something else, Daniel said, pulling up a video feed on his laptop. The footage was grainy, clearly taken from a combat helmet cam. It showed SG-1 in what looked like an ancient Egyptian temple, but the walls were made of some crystalline material that pulsed with orange light. At the far end of the chamber sat a throne, and on that throne, Mark leaned closer. The figure was humanoid but wore armor that seemed to be made of living shadow. The face was obscured by a helmet, shaped like a jackal's head, Anubis's sacred animal. When it spoke, the voice was layered, echoing with unnatural power. You are insects who dare challenge a god. I am Anubis, eternal and inevitable. Your deaths will be educational. The video cut to static as energy weapons filled the screen. Mark felt something shift inside him. Not just conscious rage, but something from Mark himself, from Stephen, who collected Egyptian antiquities and knew their stories. From Jake, who understood predators and their prey. From Mark, who had killed men for far lesser crimes than stealing the identity of gods. When? Mark asked quietly. When what? When do we go after him? Daniel closed the laptop. We don't. Not yet. Anubis commands fleets of hot-tack vessels, gold motherships. His forces number in the millions. We're working with the Takare, gold who oppose the system, lords, and the Asgard, an advanced alien race, to find a way to stop him. But it will take time. How much time? Months. Maybe years. Unacceptable, Khonshu growled. Unacceptable, Mark echoed. TLC stepped forward. I understand your desire for vengeance, Moon Knight. I have served false gods for most of my life. And when I learned the truth, I too wished to strike them down immediately. His expression was grave. But rage without strategy is merely suicide. And Anubis would welcome your fury. It would make you predictable. Mark wanted to argue, but the warrior's logic was sound. He'd made the mistake before of letting Khonshu's bloodlust override tactical thinking. It had cost innocent lives. Fine, Mark said. Then what do we do in the meantime? We prepare, Daniel said. We gather intelligence. We hit smaller targets, gold outposts, Jaffa training facilities, ships transporting weapons, or Naquata. Naquata? The mineral that powers Stargate technology. Carter's voice came from the doorway. She entered carrying a tray with what looked like equipment. It's also highly explosive under the right conditions. We use it to make bombs that can take out hot-tack vessels. She set the tray down, revealing several items. A gold Zatnik Tel, the lightning gun. Mark had seen the Jaffa use, a small communications device. and something that looked like a modified P-90 submachine gun. Your white suit makes you stand out, Carter said, which is either brilliant psychological warfare or a death sentence, depending on the mission. But you'll need more than crescent moon boomerangs to fight gold technology. Mark picked up the Zat. It felt alien in his hand, wrong somehow, but functional. Show me. For the next 3 hours, Carter walked him through gold and earth weaponry. The Zat Nictel fired electrical bolts that could stun, kill, or disintegrate depending on how many shots. Staff weapons were powerful but inaccurate. Gold hand devices could crush organs with a thought if you had the genetic marker to use them, which Mark didn't. Earth weapons were more familiar. Mark had used P-90s before, though never paired with alien armor-piercing rounds. The radios were standard military issue. The C, for explosives, were old friends. You're a quick study, Carter observed as Mark field stripped and reassembled a Zat in under 30 seconds. I've handled weapons from dozens of countries, Mark said. You adapt or you die. Which brings me to my next point. Carter pulled out a tablet showing a schematic of Mark's white suit. Your costume provides almost no tactical advantage. No armor plating, no camouflage, no environmental protection. I'd like to upgrade it. No. Khonshu's voice thundered through Mark's skull with such force that he gasped. The white is sacred. It is the moon's light made manifest. It is the shroud of judgment. You will not sully it with military pragmatism. Mark rubbed his temples. Khonshu says no. Carter frowned. The voice in your head has opinions on tactical gear. Strong opinions. Can you negotiate with him? Mark almost laughed. You don't negotiate with Khonshu. You survive him. Stephen's voice emerged then, smoother and more diplomatic than Mark's growl. Perhaps we could compromise. Captain, the white stays. It's psychologically important, both for enemies and for. He gestured vaguely at his head. But we could incorporate some of your technology discreetly. Armor weave under the fabric? A heads-up display in the mask? Something that doesn't compromise the aesthetic but increases survivability. Carter blinked at the sudden shift in Mark's demeanor and voice. That was Stephen. Mark, Stephen, said with a slight British accent that hadn't been there before. Mark handles the violence. I handle the negotiation. Division of labor, you understand. TLC's eyebrow raised slightly. Daniel looked fascinated. Carter just nodded slowly. Okay then, Stephen. I can work with that. Give me a few days to fabricate some upgrades. The door opened again, and O'Neill stuck his head in. Kids, we've got a mission. Briefing in 10. General Hammond wants our new friend to observe his first gate travel. From a safe distance, meaning, you're staying here, Moon Knight. Mark's, Stephen's, expression shifted again, back to the harder edges of Mark Spector. I didn't join your team to sit on the sidelines. You joined our team an hour ago, O'Neill countered. And you haven't completed basic training yet. So you sit this one out, learn our procedures. And if you're very good, maybe next time Santa brings you a mission, kill him, Khonshu suggested helpfully. Not helping, Mark muttered. O'Neill grinned. Talking to your god again? Tell him I said hi. And that if he wants you in the field, you need to prove you can follow orders. Starting with this one, stay put. The colonel left. Mark stared at the closed door, fists clenched. He's right, TLC said quietly. You are a formidable warrior, but you do not yet understand how we fight, how we think. The Goa'uld are not street thugs or cultists. They are ancient, cunning, and they command armies. One mistake, and you endanger not just yourself but your entire team. Mark wanted to argue, but he'd been part of enough mercenary operations to know the warrior was right. You didn't insert an unknown element into a team without training, no matter how skilled they were. Fine, he said. I'll watch. I'll learn. But when the next mission comes, he met TLC's eyes. I'm going. We shall see, TLC replied. 2 hours later, Mark stood in the control room overlooking the gate room, watching SG-1 disappear through the event horizon. The Stargate shut down with a whoosh, leaving only empty air and the promise of violence on some distant world. Patience, my fist, Khonshu whispered. The hunt is sweeter when the prey believes itself safe. And these false gods, they have no idea what hunts them now. Mark touched the scarab at his chest and smiled beneath his mask. Khonshu was right about one thing. The Goa'uld had made a terrible mistake when they stole the names of the Egyptian gods. Because now the real moon god's avatar walked among the stars. And Moon Knight never stopped hunting. The nightmare started 3 days after SG-1's mission. Mark bolted upright in his quarters, a converted storage room that the SGC had, hastily furnished with a cot and footlocker, covered in cold sweat. His hands were shaking, and for a moment he couldn't remember if he was Mark, Stephen, or Jake. The identities blurred together like watercolors in rain. You see it now, don't you? Conch's voice was different. Not angry or demanding, but almost satisfied. Mark's breath came in ragged gasps as the vision lingered behind his eyes. Thousands of worlds, billions of people, all kneeling before false gods who wore stolen faces. And above them all, a figure in shadow with a jackal's head, half real and half nightmare, wielding power that shouldn't exist. What did you show me? Mark whispered into the darkness. The truth, my fist. The scope of the desecration. You have walked among petty criminals and street-level villains for so long that you forgot what real evil looks like. Khonshu's presence pressed against Mark's consciousness like a physical weight. But I have not forgotten. I am the god of travelers by night, of those who journey through darkness. And I can see what paths these gold have walked, what they have done. Mark stood on unsteady legs and splashed water from a basin onto his face. The clock on the wall read 0347 hours. He'd been asleep less than 2 hours. This was the 4th night in a row. You need to see, Khonshu insisted. You need to understand what we face. Close your eyes. No, Mark said, but his eyes were already closing. His will subsumed by the god's power. The visions came faster now. A planet where humans were bred like cattle for gold hosts. A temple where children were sacrificed to appease a system lord's vanity. A battlefield where Jaffa warriors slaughtered entire villages that refused to worship their god. And through it all, the serpentine forms of the gold, puppeting human bodies, stealing lives, and calling it divinity. Mark's fists clenched until his nails drew blood. Stop. No. You wanted to hunt the false gods? Then see what they are. See what they have done. The final vision was worst of all. A throne room carved from black stone. And seated upon it, the figure from Daniel's video. Anubis. But this time, Mark could see more. The way reality itself seemed to bend around the false god. The way his very presence made the air scream. And in front of him, kneeling, was a human woman. Young, terrified. Anubis raised one hand. And the woman began to scream as her body was unmade from the inside out, torn apart at the molecular level, while she remained conscious through every second of it. Her death took minutes. It felt like hours. When it was over, Anubis laughed. Mark opened his eyes and vomited into the basin. Now you understand, Khonshu said softly. Now you know why I brought you here. These are not criminals to be punished and released. They are not even conquerors to be defeated. They are an abomination that must be erased from existence. I get it, Mark gasped, wiping his mouth. I get it, you bastard. Good. Because tomorrow, your training ends. Tomorrow, you go to war. The briefing room was crowded when Mark arrived at 0800, still pale from the night's visions. SG-1 was there, along with General Hammond and several other personnel Mark didn't recognize. Everyone looked grim. Moon Knight, Hammond said, gesturing to a seat. Glad you could join us. Mark noticed the pointed look at the clock. He was 3 minutes late. Apologies, General. Rough night. We've all had them, O'Neill said. Coffee's in the back. Mark poured himself a cup, noting that his hands were still trembling slightly. Carter noticed too, but said nothing. Teal CS. Gaze was knowing. The warrior had clearly seen the after effects of traumatic visions before. Hammond activated a display showing a star chart. 3 hours ago, we received intelligence from our Takare allies about a gold facility on P7J 989. According to their source, it's a training ground for Jaffa warriors, not a major installation, but strategically important to Apophis's forces in this sector. Daniel pulled up images of ancient ruins. The planet was once home to an advanced civilization that died out centuries ago. The Goa'uld have repurposed their structures for military use. Our mission is reconnaissance, assess their numbers, identify any high-value targets, and if possible, gather intelligence on their troop movements. And if we're compromised? Carter asked. Rules of engagement are defensive only, Hammond said. We're not there to start a war, just to gather information. O'Neill glanced at Mark. Which brings us to our newest team member. Moon Knight, you've spent the last 72 hours learning our protocols, studying Goa'uld tactics, and proving you can field strip a Zat. Blindfolded, Dr. Fraser has concerns about your psychological state, but she's cleared you for limited duty. Limited? Mark's voice was sharp. You follow orders, you stay with the team. And if your god tells you to go on a murder spree, you politely decline. Can you do that? Mark met O'Neill's eyes. The colonel was testing him, looking for any sign that Mark would go rogue the moment things got complicated. And honestly, Mark wasn't sure he could promise that. Khonshu's visions had left him raw, angry, and eager for violence. But he'd worked with teams before. He'd followed orders when it mattered. He could do this. I can do that, Mark said. Jake Lockley's voice whispered in the back of his mind. You're lying. Stephen's voice countered. We're doing what's necessary. There's a difference. Good, Hammond said. SG-1, you leave in 1 hour. Moon Knight, Captain Carter has some upgrades for your equipment. Dismissed. Carter's lab was a controlled chaos of alien artifacts, Earth technology, and half-finished projects. She led Mark to a workbench where his white suit had been laid out. But it looked different now. I kept the aesthetic, Carter said, picking up the cape. But I wove a layer of liquid nanotubes into the fabric. It's a prototype, based on ancient technology we recovered from Atlantis. Won't stop a direct staff blast, but it'll deflect glancing hits and reduce energy transfer from explosions. She handed him the chest piece. The armor underneath is Kevlar composite with ceramic plating at vital areas. Again, won't make you invulnerable, but it'll keep you alive longer. And I added something special to the mask. Mark examined the white mask. It looked identical to his original, but when he put it on, his vision suddenly filled with data overlays, thermal readings, motion tracking, a miniaturized heads-up display showing tactical information. Borrowed some tech from our Iris control systems, Carter explained. It'll sync with SG-1's radios and can interface with Goa'uld technology. You'll be able to see what we see, and we'll be able to track your position. Mark turned his head, watching the HUD track Carter's heat signature. This is incredible. Don't get too excited. Battery life is only about 6 hours. And if you take a hard hit to the head, the whole system might short out. But it should give you an edge. She pulled out one more item, a staff weapon, but modified. The head had been replaced with something sleeker, and the grip had been wrapped in white leather. Took a captured staff, weapon, and retrofitted it with Naquata power cells from our inventory. It's got 3 firing modes now: stun, kill, and overload. The last one is basically a one-shot. Explosive, it'll take out anything within 20 feet, but destroy the weapon in the process. Mark took the staff, feeling its weight. It was perfect, alien enough to hurt the Goa'uld with their own technology, but familiar enough that he could wield it alongside his crescent, darts and truncheon. Thank you, Captain, Mark said quietly. This is more than I expected. Carter smiled slightly. We take care of our people, even the ones who wear capes and talk to gods. She grew serious. But Mark, I need to ask, are you sure you're ready for this? Dr. Fraser mentioned you've been having nightmares. Severe ones. Mark could lie. Stephen was very good at lying when it served a purpose. But Carter had just armored him, weaponized him, and trusted him with technology that could probably level a building. She deserved honesty. Khonshu's been showing me visions, he admitted. What the Goa'uld have done across the galaxy. It's bad, Sam. Worse than anything I dealt with on Earth. And that makes you want to kill them all. Yes. Carter nodded slowly. That's normal. We all felt that way when we first learned the truth about the Goa'uld. But Mark, you need to understand. We're fighting a war that spans galaxies. We can't save everyone. We can't punish every crime. If you try, you'll burn out, go insane, or get your team killed. She does not understand, Khonshu growled. She does not serve justice as we do. Khonshu disagrees, Mark said. I'm sure he does. But Khonshu isn't the one who has to live with the consequences of your actions. You are. She put a hand on his shoulder. Promise me you won't. Let him push you into doing something that gets you or the team killed. Mark wanted a promise, but he'd learned a long time ago not to make promises he couldn't keep. I'll do my best, he said instead. It would have to be enough. The gate room was bustling with activity when SG-1 assembled. Mark wore his upgraded suit, the white fabric now reinforced with alien technology. His modified staff weapon slung across his back alongside his traditional arsenal. The mask's HUD painted the world in tactical overlays and data streams. TLC stood beside him, carrying his own staff weapon with practiced ease. Your first mission through the Chapo AI, Moon Knight. How do you feel? Like I'm about to jump into a frozen lightning bolt again, Mark said. So terrified and exhilarated. The Jaffa's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. An honest answer. Good. Fear keeps warriors alive. It is overconfidence that kills. O'Neill approached, checking his P90. Okay, kids, listen up. This is recon, not a raid. We go in quiet. We observe, we leave. If we're spotted, we fall back to the gate. No heroics, no dramatic speeches, and Moon Knight? No executing Jaffa because your god says they need punishing. Understood, Colonel, Mark said. I mean it. We're a team. You go rogue, and your office G1 permanently. He speaks boldly for a mortal, Khonshu observed. Perhaps he needs a reminder of who you serve. I understand, Colonel, Mark repeated firmly, ignoring the god's commentary. Daniel adjusted his glasses nervously. Just for the record, I still think bringing someone who hears voices from an Egyptian god on a mission to fight fake Egyptian gods is either the best idea we've ever had or spectacularly going to blow up in our faces. Why not both? Carter suggested. The Stargate began to activate, chevrons locking with heavy clunks. The event horizon burst forth, then stabilized into its shimmering surface. SG-1, you have a go. Hammond's voice came over the intercom. Godspeed. O'Neill glanced at Mark, ready to see what the universe really looks like. Moon Knight. Mark touched the scarab at his chest, feeling Khonshu's presence coiled and ready for violence. He thought of the visions, the horrors, the Goa'uld had inflicted, across 1,000 worlds. He thought of the woman in Anubis's throne room, screaming as she died. I'm ready, he said. And together, SG-1 walked through the Stargate into war. P7J 989 was a dead world trying to remember how to live. Mark stumbled out of the event horizon onto a stone platform, surrounded by crumbling ruins. The sky was a sickly amber color, and the air tasted of copper and ancient dust. Vegetation struggled to reclaim what looked like it had once been a magnificent city, vine-covered, towers reaching toward the sky, broken aqueducts, plazas where the stone had been worn smooth by millions of footsteps. And everywhere, the marks of Goa'uld occupation. Glider landing pads carved into ancient buildings. Patrol routes marked with staff weapon burn scars, and in the distance, the unmistakable pyramid shape of a Goa'uld vessel that had been converted into a ground fortress. Everybody through. O'Neill whispered into his radio. Check, Carter confirmed, already scanning with a handheld device, picking up multiple Naquata signatures. Looks like they've got at least 50 Jaffa stationed here, plus support personnel. And I'm reading some kind of energy signature from the main structure, Daniel added, pointing at the pyramid. Could be a sarcophagus or possibly a communication array. TLC knelt, examining footprints in the dust. Recent patrol. They passed through here less than an hour ago. We should move to concealment. Mark's HUD was painting the world in threat assessments and tactical data. He could see heat signatures through walls, track movement patterns, even estimate the weight and armament of distant figures. Carter's technology was extraordinary. Technology is a crutch, Khonshu whispered. You should rely on your senses. On my gifts. Both have their uses, Mark murmured, too quietly for anyone else to hear. SG-1 moved as a unit, flowing through the ruins with practiced efficiency. O'Neill took point. Carter and Daniel covered the flanks. TLC brought up the rear, and Mark stayed in the center, the position for the newest member, where he could be watched and where his inexperience wouldn't get anyone killed. It should have chafed. Mark Spector had led mercenary teams across 3 continents. He'd run solo operations that would make most Black Ops specialists weep. But he also understood team dynamics, and right now, he was the unknown variable. Trust was earned. They'd been moving for 10 minutes when Mark's HUD flagged movement ahead. Contact, he whispered. 3 heat signatures, approximately 60 meters, moving perpendicular to our position. Carter checked her scanner. Confirmed. Jaffa patrol. O'Neill hand-signaled for everyone to take cover. They melted into the shadows of a collapsed colonnade. Weapons ready, but not raised. The patrol passed 30 meters away, 3 Jaffa warriors in full armor. Staff weapons held at the ready, their symbiotes visible through gaps in their chest plates. Mark felt his fingers tighten on his modified staff weapon. These were the enemy, servants of false gods. They'd chosen to perpetuate the lie, to enforce tyranny across the galaxy. Khonshu's rage pulsed through him, demanding action. Strike now, the god commanded. 3 against 6. Easy prey. No, Mark breathed. They are complicit in the desecration. They kneel before false idols. They deserve death. Not now. One of the Jaffa stopped, tilting his head as if listening. For a horrible moment, Mark thought he'd spoken too loudly. The warrior's hand went to his symbiote pouch, and Mark could see the serpentine shape writhing inside. Then the Jaffa spoke in a guttural language Mark didn't understand, and the patrol moved on. O'Neill let out a slow breath. That was close. Everyone stay sharp. They continued deeper into the ruins, navigating through what Daniel identified as a former residential district. The architecture was hauntingly beautiful, graceful arches, intricate mosaics depicting astronomical phenomena, buildings designed to catch and reflect light in ways that created moving patterns throughout the day. This civilization was remarkable, Daniel whispered, running his hand along a wall carving. They were studying the stars, mapping celestial events. This symbol here, it's similar to ancient Sumerian astronomical charts, but more advanced. They knew things about the universe that we're only beginning to understand. And then the Goa'uld came, Mark said quietly. Probably Apophis, based on the iconography we're seeing, Daniel confirmed. He would have landed, declared himself a god, and enslaved or killed anyone who resisted. The survivors would have been taken off-world for host bodies or mining operations. Mark looked at the ruins with new eyes. This wasn't just a dead city. It was a tomb, not just of a civilization, but of potential, of knowledge, of millions of lives that might have flourished, if not for the Goa'ulds. Hunger for worship. Now do you understand why we must eradicate them? Khonshu asked, and for once there was no rage in his voice, only cold certainty. I understand, Mark replied. They reached a vantage point overlooking the converted pyramid fortress. Carter pulled out a compact telescope and began scanning. I count 37 Jaffa visible on the perimeter, she reported. Patrol patterns suggest shifts every 4 hours. The pyramid itself has been retrofitted with modern Goa'uld technology, ring transporters, likely a Peltac command center at the apex. And those energy signatures are definitely coming from inside. Could be a training center for new Jaffa recruits, TLC said. Apophis often uses conquered worlds as staging grounds for his forces. Young Jaffa are taught combat, tactics, and absolute obedience to their god. Indoctrination camps, Mark said, turning children into soldiers. Indeed, I was trained at such a facility when I was young. It is effective. Mark studied TLC's expression, seeing the pain buried deep beneath the warrior's stoic exterior. The Jaffa had served the false gods for decades before joining SG-1. How many atrocities had he committed in Apophis's name? How many innocents had died by his hand before he learned the truth? And yet here he stood, fighting against the very system that had created him, seeking redemption through action. He carries his shame well, Khonshu observed. There may be hope for him yet. I need to get closer to that energy signature, Daniel said, adjusting his glasses. If it's a communication array, we might be able to tap into Apophis's command network. Could give us intelligence on his fleet movements. O'Neill frowned. That means going inside. Not necessarily. If I can get within 50 meters, I might be able to use this. Daniel pulled out a device that looked like a modified PDA. Talk array. Scanning technology. It can read Goa'uld transmissions through solid matter. 50 meters means we're practically on top of them, Carter pointed out. I'm aware of that, Sam. But the intelligence would be worth it. O'Neill looked at each team member in turn, his expression calculating. Moon Knight, you've been quiet. What does your magical HUD say? Mark activated the thermal imaging, studying the pyramid's heat signatures. I'm seeing a patrol gap on the eastern approach. If we time it right, we could get to that cluster of buildings. About 40 meters from the pyramid's base. From there, Daniel could do his thing while we provide overwatch. And if we're spotted, fall back to secondary position here, Mark indicated a ruined temple complex. Then fighting retreat to the gate. The narrow passages would force them to come at us in smaller groups. Carter nodded approvingly. Sound tactics. I've done this before, Mark said. Different enemy, same principles. O'Neill studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, we go with Moon Knight's plan. TLC, you're with me on Overwatch. Carter, stick with Daniel. Moon Knight, your floater, watch our backs and cover Daniel if things go sideways. Understood. They moved out, using the ruins as cover, timing their movements to the Jaffa patrol patterns. Mark's HUD tracked everything: heat signatures, motion vectors, even wind patterns that might carry sound. It was like having Khonshu's divine awareness combined with military-grade technology. You are adapting well to this new battlefield, Khonshu acknowledged. Perhaps these mortals are not as foolish as I first believed. They reached the cluster of buildings without incident. Daniel immediately went to work with his scanning device, pointing it at the pyramid while Carter kept watch. O'Neill and TLC had taken position in a partially collapsed tower with clear sight lines. Mark positioned himself at the choke point between their location and the patrol routes, staff weapon ready. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. Daniel worked his scanner, occasionally muttering to himself. Carter scanned their perimeter. Mark watched the patrols, counting their intervals, noting their discipline. Then Daniel gasped. Oh no. What? Carter whispered urgently. This isn't a training facility. It's a breeding complex. Daniel's face had gone pale. They're not training Jaffa here. They're implanting symbiotes in human captives. Forced infestation. Mark felt ice form in his stomach. How many captives? At least 200, based on these readings. They're being held in the lower levels, waiting for implantation. 200 souls about to be stolen. Khonshu's voice was molten fury. 200 lives about to be erased so that parasites can wear their flesh. This cannot stand. It's not our mission, Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, it's not. O'Neill's voice came through the radio. We're here for recon only. We report back to Hammond, and he decides our next move. By which time those people will be infested, Mark said. They'll be gone, trapped in their own bodies while the gold uses them. I know, and it makes me sick. But we're 5 people against 50+ Jaffa in an unknown facility, with no backup and no exit strategy beyond running for the gate. Mark looked at the pyramid fortress. 200 people. He thought of the visions Khonshu had shown him, the horrors the gold inflicted. He thought of the woman in Anubis's throne room, screaming. We can't just leave them, he said. Moon Knight, I understand how you feel. Do you? Mark's voice hardened, and he wasn't sure if it was his own rage or Khonshu's bleeding through. Do you understand what it's like to know that innocent people are about to be turned into meat, puppets for parasitic snakes? And you have the power to stop it, but you're going to walk away because the orders say recon only. Yes, O'Neill said quietly. I understand exactly what that's like, because I've had to make that call a dozen times, and it never gets easier. Mark stood there, staff weapon clenched in white-knuckled hands, torn between duty and justice. This was the moment Khonshu had been pushing him towards since they'd arrived. The moment where he had to choose between following orders and following his mission. Save them, Khonshu commanded. I did not bring you across realities to stand idle while evil unfolds. You are my fist. Strike. Mark, Carter's voice was gentle. We will save them. But not today. We'll report this to Hammond. Plan a proper rescue operation with reinforcements. We'll come back with SG-2, SG-3, maybe TACRA support. We'll do it right. And if those people are already infested by then? She had no answer for that. Mark looked at his teammates. O'Neill with his tactical pragmatism. Carter with her compassionate logic. Daniel with his horror at what was happening. TLC who understood better than anyone what it meant to serve false gods. And he made his choice. You're right, Mark said, and felt Khonshu's fury explode through his consciousness like a supernova. We need to do this right. Let's get the intelligence and get out. Coward, Khonshu roared. Betrayer of your oath. You will save them now, or I will. You'll what? Mark asked silently. Abandon me? You need me as much as I need you. More, maybe. So shut up and let me work. For the first time since Mark had become Moon Knight, Khonshu went silent. Daniel finished his scan. Got it. Encrypted transmissions, but the TACRA should be able to decrypt them. Then let's move. O'Neill said. Back to the gate, double time. They withdrew through the ruins. Moving faster now, but still maintaining tactical discipline. Mark kept expecting Khonshu to resume his tirade, to punish him for choosing pragmatism over righteous fury. But the god remained silent, and somehow that was more terrifying than any rage. They were 50 meters from the gate when TLC stopped abruptly. We are not alone. Mark's HUD flagged movement a split second later. Heat signatures. Lots of them. Coming from multiple directions. Ambush, Carter breathed. The Jaffa emerged from concealment, at least 20 of them, staff weapons raised. And walking between them, wearing the armor of a system Lord's first prime, was a warrior whose helmet bore the mark of Apophis, a coiled serpent. He removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face and eyes that glowed with gold possession. SG-1, the gold said in that layered, echoing voice. We have been expecting you, and you have brought us a gift, a new warrior, dressed in white, carrying the symbol of Khonshu. The eyes fixed on Mark. Our master will be most interested in claiming you as a host. O'Neill raised his P90. Thanks for the offer, but he's not interested. You misunderstand, human. You have no choice. The Jaffa opened fire. The first staff blast caught Mark's cape, setting the edge aflame before Carter's nanoweave technology dispersed the energy. Mark dove behind a fallen pillar as the ruins erupted into a war zone, staff weapons, firing orange bolts that superheated stone, P90 rounds cracking through the air, Zatnik-tel lightning arcing between combatants. Fall back to the gate, O'Neill shouted, firing controlled bursts that dropped 2 Jaffa. Move, move, move. SG-1 retreated in a fighting withdrawal, but Mark's HUD was painting a nightmare scenario. More heat signatures converging from the flanks. They'd walked into a kill box. Now do you see? Khonshu's voice returned, cold and accusing. Your mercy has doomed your team. You should have struck when I commanded. You should have killed them all. Not helping. Mark snarled, raising his modified staff weapon and firing. The blast caught a Jaffa in the chest, sending him sprawling. Mark's muscle memory from years of mercenary work took over. Identify target. Fire, move, find cover, fire again. The rhythm of combat. TLC fought like a force of nature, his staff weapon singing as it discharged. Each shot was precise, economical, deadly. There are too many. We must reach the Chapa AI. Daniel was firing his Zat, panic in his eyes, but his hands steady. Carter had switched to a gold shock grenade, lobbing it into a cluster of advancing Jaffa. The explosion sent 3 warriors flying, their armor smoking. But for every Jaffa they dropped, 2 more appeared from the ruins. The system lord's first prime strode forward, unhurried, confident in his numerical superiority. You cannot escape, he called out in that layered gold voice. Surrender, and your deaths will be quick. Resist, and we will take you alive for our master's experiments. Mark's HUD showed the gate was 40 meters away, 40 meters through a corridor of death, with Jaffa on 3 sides and more closing from behind. They weren't going to make it. Finally, you understand, Khonshu whispered. Now you see that mercy is weakness. That hesitation kills. You should have listened to me. Mark looked at his teammates. O'Neill was bleeding from a graze to his shoulder, but still firing. Carter was coordinating their retreat with tactical precision despite the chaos. Daniel was terrified but holding position. TLC was a pillar of strength, never wavering. They were good people, brave people, and Mark's choice to follow orders, instead of his instincts, had led them into this trap. Let me take control, Khonshu offered. Let me show you what a god can do with a willing vessel. I will save them. I will punish the false ones. All you must do is surrender to me completely. Mark had heard that offer before. In Cairo, when he'd been dying from gunshot wounds. In New York, when Bushmen had nearly killed him. Every time he'd been at the edge of death, Khonshu had offered the same bargain, total surrender in exchange for power. And every time, Mark had refused. Because he'd seen what happened when Khonshu had complete control. The violence became indiscriminate, the punishment excessive. People died who didn't deserve it. But now his team was going to die because of his choice. How much control? Mark asked. All of it. Your body, your will, your very soul, for as long as the battle lasts. And in exchange, I will show these pretenders what divine wrath truly means. Moon Knight, what are you doing? O'Neill shouted. Stop mumbling and move. Mark made his decision. Stephen, Jake, I'm sorry for what's about to happen. Stay deep. Don't let him find you. His other personalities retreated to the furthest corners of his fractured psyche, and Mark Spector opened the door he'd kept locked for years. Khonshu, he said aloud. I accept. The god poured into him like molten silver. The first thing that changed was Mark's perception. The world suddenly snapped into crystalline clarity. He could see individual grains of sand, track the trajectory of every staff blast, count the heartbeats of his enemies. Time seemed to slow, or perhaps he was simply moving through it differently. Finally, Khonshu's voice was no longer separate, but merged with Mark's thoughts. Now, my fist, let us deliver judgment. Mark moved. He crossed the 15 meters to the nearest Jaffa in less than 2 seconds. Faster than any human should be able to move. His staff weapon swung in an arc that defied physics, the strike enhanced by divine strength. The impact shattered the Jaffa's armor and sent him flying into 2 of his companions. What the O'Neill started. Mark was already gone, flowing through the Jaffa formation like water through cracks. His crescent darts flew with impossible accuracy, each one finding the gap in armor where the symbiote pouch lay. Jaffa warriors collapsed, their gods dying in their bellies. These are not gods, Khonshu spoke through Mark's mouth, his voice layered with divine resonance. They are worms pretending at divinity. And I am the moon that sees all deception. A staff blast should have taken Mark in the chest, but he twisted impossibly, the bolt passing so close it singed his white suit. He grabbed the weapon mid-motion and tore it from the Jaffas, hands with strength that made the warrior's bones crack. Mark, or Khonshu wearing Mark's body, reversed the staff and drove it through the Jaffa's chest with enough force to pin him to a wall. The first prime raised his own staff weapon, but Mark was already moving. He threw a crescent dart that severed the weapon's power cable, then closed the distance before the Goa'uld could react. His fist, wrapped in moonlight that shouldn't exist in the amber daylight, struck the possessed warrior in the chest. The Goa'uld screamed, not with pain, but with existential terror, as Khonshu's power burned through its essence. The serpentine form writhed out of its host's body, smoking and dying, falling to the dust. Impossible, the host gasped, suddenly freed after years of imprisonment. Then he collapsed, his body too damaged to survive without the symbiote's healing. Mercy would have been killing him years ago, Khonshu observed coldly. But these things happen. Mark/Khonshu turned to face the remaining Jaffa. There were still 15 of them, but they hesitated now, having watched their first prime fall to what looked like a demon in white. I am Khonshu. Mark's voice rang out with divine authority. The true moon god, traveler of night paths, protector of those who walk in darkness. You serve pretenders who stole my brother's name and wear it like stolen robes. Apophis is no god. He is a parasite, and I have come to cleanse the galaxy of his stain. One Jaffa, braver or more foolish than the others, raised his staff weapon. We serve our god. We will die for. The crescent dart took him in the throat before he could finish. Mark didn't remember throwing it. They always say they'll die for their false gods, Khonshu mused. So few understand I'm simply granting their wish. Stand down. Teal'c's voice cut through the violence. He stepped forward, his own staff weapon lowered. Jaffa, can you not see? This is a true god, not a Goa'uld pretending at divinity. I have walked among the Tauri and learned the truth. The Goa'uld are false. But this is something else. The Jaffa looked at Teal'c, recognizing the Shoal VA, the traitor, who had abandoned Apophis to serve Earth. Some raised their weapons. Others hesitated. Look at what he did to our first prime, one Jaffa said, his voice shaking. No human could do that. No Tauri weapon could burn a symbiote without touching its host. Perhaps. Another began, then stopped. The religious indoctrination of a lifetime. Ward with what? His eyes had just witnessed. Mark/Khonshu felt the tactical situation stabilizing. The Jaffa were uncertain, afraid, their absolute faith in their gods shaken. This was the moment to press the advantage, to kill them all while they hesitated, to eliminate the threat permanently. Do it, Khonshu commanded. They are complicit in 10,000 crimes. They enforce tyranny. They deserve death. But somewhere deep inside, Mark Spector pushed back. Some of them are children, he said, his voice his own again for a moment. Indoctrinated from birth. They don't know any better. TLC was indoctrinated. He learned. Those who can be saved will save themselves. The rest are simply enemies we haven't killed yet. Mark. Carter's voice was uncertain. Are you? Is that still you? Mark turned to look at his team. O'Neill had his P90 raised, but not aimed. Clearly unsure what he was seeing. Carter looked fascinated and terrified. Daniel was staring with the expression of someone watching a myth come to life. TLC alone seemed calm, accepting. It's me, Mark said, and realized he wasn't entirely sure that was true anymore. It's both of us. Khonshu and Mark. Merged. That's not creepy at all, O'Neill muttered. The Stargate began to activate behind them. Incoming wormhole. Everyone tensed, weapons raised. Expecting reinforcements for the Jaffa. But the iris code was friendly. SG-1, this is Hammond. We're detecting weapons fire at your position. Do you require immediate extraction? O'Neill grabbed his radio. Affirmative, sir. Things got complicated. We're coming through now with a new situation you're going to love. The Jaffa were still frozen in uncertainty. Mark/Khonshu could kill them all in seconds. Should kill them all. But, go, Mark said to the warriors. Return to your false god and tell him what you saw here. Tell him that the true gods are coming for him. Tell him that the moon sees his crimes and judgment is coming. You are making a mistake, Khonshu warned. Maybe, Mark replied, but it's my mistake to make. One by one, the Jaffa lowered their weapons and fled into the ruins. Within seconds, SG-1 stood alone among the bodies of the dead. That was either the smartest thing you've ever done or the dumbest. O'Neill said, I'll let you know which after we see if Apophis decides to nuke this planet out of spite. We need to move, Carter said. That incoming wormhole could be reinforcements. They ran for the gate, boots pounding on ancient stone. As Mark passed through the event horizon, he felt Khonshu's presence begin to recede. The god withdrawing back into the scarab and leaving. Mark with only echoes of divine power. You are weak, Khonshu said, disappointed. But you fought. Well, perhaps there is hope for you yet. My fist. Then the god was gone. And Mark was just Mark again, exhausted, bloodied, and terrified by what he'd just done. He stumbled out of the wormhole into the SGC gate room, where a full security team had weapons trained on him. General Hammond stood on the control room balcony, his expression unreadable. Stand down, O'Neill called out. He's with us. Mostly. Mark pulled off his mask, revealing sweat-soaked features, and eyes that might have been glowing silver for just a moment. He looked at his hands, remembering the strength that had flowed through them, the speed, the divine fury. General, Mark said quietly, I think we need to talk about what just happened. Hammond nodded slowly. I think you're right, son. Debriefing room. Now. And someone get Dr. Fraser. I want a full medical and psychological workup. As security escorted Mark away, he heard Daniel whisper to Carter. Did we just watch someone become a god? I don't know, she replied. But I think we just made the Goa'uld's worst nightmare come true. In the depths of Mark's consciousness, wrapped around the scarab amulet, Khonshu laughed. The debriefing lasted 4 hours. Mark sat in the same interrogation room where he'd first been questioned. But this time the atmosphere was different. Hammond wasn't just curious anymore. He was concerned. O'Neill had his arms crossed, studying Mark like a tactical problem that needed solving. Carter kept glancing at her medical scanner as if it might explain what had happened. Daniel looked like he wanted to take notes, but was restraining himself. TLC simply sat in respectful silence, understanding something the others didn't. So let me get this straight, Hammond said, rubbing his temples. You made a deal with the voice in your head, which claims to be an actual Egyptian god, to let him possess you, completely in exchange for the power to save your team. That's accurate, sir, Mark replied. His voice was hoarse, and every muscle in his body ached. The divine possession had burned through him like wildfire through dry grass. And during this possession, you single-handedly defeated 15 Jaffa warriors, killed a Goa'uld by punching it, and then delivered a speech about being the true moon god, before letting the survivors go. Also accurate. O'Neill leaned forward. The part I'm stuck on is the letting them go bit. We had them beaten. We could have secured the gate room, called for backup, maybe even freed those prisoners you were so worried about. Instead, you gave them a message to take back to Apophis. Mark met his gaze steadily. I did. Why? Because Khonshu wanted me to kill them all. Mark said quietly. Children, conscripts, true believers, he didn't care. They served a false god, so they deserved death. And when I was merged with him, I could feel that certainty, that absolute conviction. It would have been so easy to just let go, to let the god decide who lives and dies. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But I didn't come here to be Conch's puppet. I came here to fight the Goa'uld. And if I can't tell the difference between a soldier following orders and a system lord who needs to be stopped, then I'm just another tyrant wearing a different mask. The room was silent for a moment. Then Carter spoke, her voice carefully neutral. The medical scans show significant physiological changes during the possession. Your muscle density increased by approximately 40%. Neural activity spiked to levels that should have caused seizures. And your body temperature dropped to near hypothermic levels, which is unusual for enhanced physical performance. Khonshu is a moon god, Daniel interjected, adjusting his glasses excitedly. Lunar deities are often associated with the night, with cold, with reflection rather than heat. If he's real, and I'm not saying I believe he is, but if he were, his divine essence might manifest as decreased temperature, rather than the heat we'd associate with solar deities. So you're saying our newest team member is a living conduit for an ancient god who can possess him at will and turn him into a super soldier. O'Neill summarized. That's one interpretation, Daniel said. Great. Just great. O'Neill looked at Mark. And you can control this? Keep your moon god from going on a rampage. Mark wanted to say yes. Stephen Grant's voice in the back of his mind was already crafting a reassuring lie. But Mark Spector had seen what Khonshu could do with full control, had felt the god's absolute certainty that violence was always the answer. I don't know, he admitted. Today was the first time I've ever given him complete control. Usually, I keep him on a leash, he enhances my abilities, gives me visions, guides my hand. But today, I let him drive. And Colonel, he didn't want to stop. When I told those Jaffa to leave, Khonshu fought me every second. If I'd been weaker, or more tired, or just a little less stubborn. He trailed off, and Hammond finished the thought. You might not have gotten control back. Yes, sir. TLC spoke for the first time in over an hour. I have faced gods. True gods, not Goa'uld pretenders. The Asgard, the ancients. Beings of pure energy who can reshape reality with thought. He looked at Mark with something like understanding. They are powerful beyond mortal comprehension, and they are dangerous even when they mean well. But you, Moon Knight, are something different. You are mortal and divine both, walking the line between human and God. And which side of that line do you think I'll fall on? Mark asked. That depends on you, TLC replied. The Goa'uld claim to be gods, but are merely parasites. You house a god, but remain human. Which nature will dominate? That is a question only you can answer through your choices. Hammond stood, hands clasped behind his back. I'm suspending you from active duty pending psychological evaluation. Sir, O'Neill started. That wasn't a request. Colonel, Mr. Spector just admitted he might lose control to an entity that considers mass murder an acceptable solution to tactical problems. Until Dr. Fraser and her team can establish protocols for monitoring his condition, he's confined to base. Mark had expected this. It was the smart call, the safe call. But it still felt like failure. I understand, General, he said quietly. However, Hammond continued, I'm not kicking you off SG-1. What you did today, saving your team, facing down a superior force, making the hard choice to show mercy when killing would have been easier. That's exactly the kind of soldier we need in this fight. You just need to prove you can do it without losing yourself in the process. How long do I have? Dr. Fraser will make that determination. Could be days. Could be weeks. Could be never. If she decides you're too unstable. Hammond's expression softened slightly. But for what it's worth, son, I've seen a lot of good men struggle with darkness. The fact that you're fighting it instead of embracing it, that counts for something. 3 days passed. Mark spent them in what amounted to comfortable imprisonment, a larger quarters, with actual furniture, access to the commissary and gym, but always under observation. Security personnel tracked his movements. Dr. Fraser conducted daily evaluations, and Khonshu, surprisingly, remained silent. The god's absence was almost worse than his presence. Mark had grown accustomed to the constant commentary, the demands for violence, the visions of justice to be delivered. Without conscious voice, Mark was alone with his other personalities, Steven's cultivated sophistication, Jake's street-smart pragmatism, and his own fractured psyche trying to hold them all together. On the fourth day, TLC came to visit. The Jaffa warrior entered without knocking, carrying 2 trays from the commissary. He set one in front of Mark, some kind of stew with bread, and kept the other for himself. "You have been avoiding the others," TLC observed, eating with calm efficiency. "They're afraid of me," Mark replied. "I don't blame them. They are not afraid. They are uncertain. There is a difference." TLC paused, choosing his words carefully. "When I first joined the Tauri, they did not trust me. How could they? I had served Apophis for decades. I had killed hundreds in his name. I was the enemy wearing an ally's face. How did you earn their trust? By proving, through action and time, that my loyalty to them was stronger than my history of serving false gods. By accepting that trust must be earned, not demanded." TLC met Mark's eyes. "And by forgiving myself for what I had done when I did not know the truth." Mark pushed his stew around with a fork. "I knew the truth. I knew Khonshu was dangerous. I let him in anyway. To save your team. That is not a sin, Moon Knight. That is sacrifice. Is it? Or was it just another excuse to let the violence loose?" Mark's hands clenched. "You don't know what it was like. TLC, when I was merged with him, I could feel his joy. He wasn't just fighting to protect SG-1. He was enjoying it. Every death, every broken bone, every moment of terror in those Jaffa's eyes. And the worst part? So was I." TLC was quiet for a long moment. "I too have felt joy in battle. The Goa'uld conditioning runs deep. We are trained from childhood to find glory in combat, to revel in our strength over the weak. Even now, years after my betrayal of Apophis, I sometimes feel that dark pleasure when I fight." He leaned forward. "But feeling it does not mean surrendering to it. You chose mercy when your God demanded slaughter. That choice defines you more than any pleasure you felt in the fight." Before Mark could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed in the corridors. Through his door, Mark could hear personnel running, orders being shouted. TLC stood immediately, moving to the door. A security officer appeared seconds later. "Sir, we have a situation. The Takare have sent an urgent message. Apophis is launching an attack on P7J 989. He's learned about Moon Knight's message and wants to demonstrate what happens to those who claim divine authority." Mark was on his feet. "The prisoners. The breeding complex. He's going to kill them all. Worse," the officer said. "He's going to infest them, then send them through the gate as a message to Earth. 200 Goa'uld hosts, all programmed to activate simultaneously and slaughter everyone in the SGC." TLC's expression darkened. "A strategy he has used before. Effective and ruthless. How long do we have?" Mark demanded. "The Takare estimates 6 hours before the first group arrives at the gate." Mark grabbed his upgraded white suit from where it hung in the corner. "Then we need to go back. Now, rescue those people before Apophis can use them as weapons." "You're confined to base," the officer reminded him. "I don't care. I left those people behind once because I followed orders. I'm not making that mistake again." The officer looked uncertain, then spoke into his radio. "Sir, Moon Knight is requesting permission to join the rescue operation." There was a pause. Then Hammond's voice crackled. "Through. Tell him his confinement is temporarily lifted, but he goes with a full security detail. And if Khonshu takes control again, they're authorized to use whatever force necessary to subdue him. Is that clear?" Mark pulled on his suit, checking his weapons. "Crystal clear, General." "Good. Report to the gate room in 10 minutes. And Mr. Spectre? Don't make me regret this." "I'll do my best, sir." TLC watched Mark arm himself. Crescent darts. Truncheon, the modified staff weapon. A Zatniktel. "You understand this is likely a trap. Apophis knows you will come. He will be waiting." "I know." Mark pulled his mask on, and the HUD flickered to life. "But those people are going to die, or worse, because I pissed off a false god. I have to make this right." "Then let us make it right together," TLC said. "For I too have scores to settle with Apophis. And I would see how a true god's avatar fights when his team stands beside him." They headed for the gate room. "Where SG-1, SG-3, and a contingent of Marines were already assembling. O'Neill saw Mark approaching and shook his head. You just can't stay out of trouble, can you? It's a gift, Mark replied. Carter had her P90 ready and a determined expression. We're going to need that gift. Talk RA intelligence says Apophis has tripled the Jaffa garrison. We're looking at over 100 hostiles, plus support staff and possibly a few minor. Gould overseeing the implantation process. 100? One of the Marines whistled. That's suicide. Daniel adjusted his glasses nervously. The Talk RA are sending a team to help, and the Asgard might provide air support. Maybe. Thor wasn't specific. So we're relying on might and maybe, O'Neill summarized. Fantastic. Anyone else want to point out what a terrible idea? This is before we go get ourselves killed. Mark stepped forward, looking at the assembled soldiers. I know I'm the new guy. I know you don't trust me. And you probably think I'm crazy because I talk to a god in my head who tells me to kill people. He took a breath. But there are 200 innocent people on that planet who are about to have their souls stolen. And we're the only ones who can stop it. So yeah, it's a terrible idea. It's probably going to get some of us killed. But we're doing it anyway, because that's what heroes do. The Marines exchanged glances. One of them, a sergeant with a scar across his jaw, stepped forward. I'm in. Can't let the Goa'uld think they can threaten Earth without consequences. Others nodded their agreement. O'Neill looked at his team, then at the assembled forces, and finally at Mark. Okay, he said. But Moon Knight, if your god tells you to go all divine wrath again, you clear it with me first. We do this as a team, or we don't do it at all. Mark extended his hand. Deal. They shook on it, and somewhere in the depths of Mark's conscience stirred. Finally, the god purred. Now the real hunt begins. Now we show these pretenders what true divine justice looks like. Not justice, Mark corrected silently. Rescue. We're there to save people, not punish gods. Yet, Khonshu added, not punish gods yet. But soon, my fist. Soon we will tear down Apophis's throne and scatter his ashes across the stars. Mark ignored the god and focused on his team. They were walking into hell to save people who would never know their names, never thank them, might not even survive the rescue. But that was the job. That was what it meant to be a hero in a universe of false gods and impossible odds. The Stargate activated with its familiar whoosh. The event horizon stabilized. Hammond's voice came over the intercom one last time. SG teams, you have a go. Bring our people home. And Moon Knight, for the second time in a week, walked through the gate into war. P7J 989 had transformed into a fortress. The moment SG-1, SG-3, and their Marine contingent emerged from the Stargate, they came under immediate fire. Staff weapon blasts lit up the amber sky, forcing everyone to dive for cover behind the stone platform. Mark's HUD painted the nightmare in thermal signatures. At least 50 Jaffa warriors in defensive positions, with more moving to flank. Ambush, Carter shouted, returning fire with her P90. They were waiting for us. You think? O'Neill snarled, dropping a Jaffa with a controlled burst. Everyone fall back too. The Stargate shut down behind them with a decisive whoosh. Or not, O'Neill finished. Gate room is compromised. We're committed now. Mark's enhanced vision picked out the tactical situation in seconds. The Jaffa had established a kill zone with overlapping fields of fire, using the ruins as cover while leaving the open ground around the gate exposed. Classic military doctrine. Effective. They learn, Khonshu observed. The false gods teach their slaves well, but they have not faced true divine power in battle formation. We need to break their line, Mark said, his tactical mind honed through years of mercenary work, analyzing angles and weak points. There, eastern approach, where the ruins create a blind spot. If we can punch through, we can flank them. Major Pierce, commanding SG-3, shook his head. That's 30 meters of open ground under fire. We'd be cut down before we made it halfway. Not if I go first. Moon Knight, O'Neill started. I'm faster than you, tougher than you, and if I die, Khonshu will just bring me back angrier. Mark gripped his modified staff weapon. I can draw their fire long enough for you to advance. Trust me. TLC moved beside him. You will not go alone. I know Jaffa tactics. Together, we can create sufficient chaos. O'Neill looked between them, clearly calculating odds he didn't like. Then he nodded. 30 seconds. You get us 30 seconds of chaos, and we'll push through. After that, you're on your own until we can support. 30 seconds, Mark agreed. Stephen, Jake, stay sharp. This is going to get ugly. His other personalities stirred in the depths of his fractured psyche, preparing themselves for whatever was coming. Mark and TLC broke cover simultaneously. The Jaffa response was immediate. A wall of orange staff, weapon fire that would have vaporized normal soldiers. But Mark was moving with Khonshu's divine enhancement, his body responding faster than human reflexes should allow. He jinked left, rolled right, came up firing his own staff weapon. A Jaffa fell. Then another. TLC fought like a Jaffa warrior who'd spent a lifetime mastering their tactics and now used that knowledge against them. He anticipated their movements, countered their strategies, turned their training into predictable patterns he could exploit. His staff weapon sang its deadly song, and warriors fell before him. Sholvier, one Jaffa screamed, "Traitor! I am free." TLC roared back, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "And I will see every false god torn from their throne." 20 seconds. The rest of the team was moving now, using the chaos Mark and TLC had created to push forward. Marines laid down covering fire. Carter was already calling out tactical adjustments. Daniel was doing his best not to get killed. Mark threw a crescent dart that took a Jaffa in the throat, then closed distance with another warrior, and drove his truncheon into the symbiote pouch. The creature inside screamed and died, and the Jaffa collapsed without his god. 30 seconds. They'd broken through the kill zone and reached the cover of the ruins. 5 Marines were wounded, but none dead. A miracle considering the firepower they'd faced. Major Pierce was already organizing a perimeter while field medics worked on the injured. "That was insane," Pierce said, slightly awed. "You two just charged a platoon of Jaffa warriors." "It was tactically sound," TLC replied calmly, checking his staff weapons charge. "It was suicide with style," O'Neill corrected. "But it worked, so I'm not complaining." "Carter, where's that breeding complex?" She consulted her scanner. 300 meters, bearing 270. "But I'm reading massive energy signatures between us and the target. They've reinforced the approach." "Of course they have," O'Neill muttered. "Daniel, any brilliant archaeological insights that'll get us past 100 angry Jaffa?" Daniel was examining the ruins around them, his academic mind working despite the combat situation. "Actually, yes. These structures, they're not just buildings. Look at the way they're positioned." He pulled out a hand-drawn map, marking locations. They form a pattern, astronomical alignment, specifically oriented toward the planet's 3 moons. And this time of day, the shadows would create pathways. "Hidden routes," Mark interrupted, seeing what Daniel was getting at. "The original inhabitants built secret passages using light and shadow." "Clever. Very clever. And if I'm right, there should be an entrance somewhere. Around." Daniel moved to a collapsed wall and began feeling along the stone. Here, a section of wall swung inward, revealing a passage carved into the rock below. It was narrow, dark, and obviously ancient. "Of course it's a creepy underground tunnel," O'Neill said. "Why wouldn't it be?" Mark activated his HUD's night vision, peering into the darkness. The passage extended for at least 100 meters, heading in the general direction of the pyramid fortress. "It's structurally sound, old, but maintained by the dry climate." "How do we know it leads where we need to go?" one of the Marines asked. "We're Marines, Captain. Making noise and attracting attention is what we do." Pierce checked his rifle. "You've got 1 hour. After that, we're going to run out of ammo and goodwill, and things will get very bad very fast." O'Neill nodded. 1 hour. We'll make it work." He looked at his team. "Okay, kids. Dark, creepy tunnel full of who knows what. Or stay here and get shot by angry Jaffa." "I vote tunnel." "Seconded," Carter said. They descended into darkness, leaving SG-3 to hold the line above. The tunnel was exactly as unpleasant as Mark had anticipated, narrow enough that they had to move, single file, low enough that taller team members had to duck, and filled with the kind of oppressive silence that made every footstep sound like a gunshot. Mark took point, his HUD providing night vision while Khonshu's divine senses picked up things the technology couldn't. The faint vibration of footsteps far ahead, the subtle shift in air pressure that suggested chambers opening off the main passage. the copper-sweet smell of blood. We are walking into the belly of the beast, Khonshu observed. Good. Let us see how it digests divine wrath. They'd been moving for 10 minutes when Mark's HUD flagged movement ahead. He raised his fist, signaling stop. The team froze. Contact, Mark whispered. 3 signatures, approximately 20 meters. Human, not Jaffa. The prisoners? Daniel asked hopefully. Or guards, TLC cautioned. They crept forward until voices became audible, terrified voices speaking in a language Mark didn't recognize, but his HUD was attempting to translate. The passage opened into a small chamber where 3 figures huddled together, illuminated by a dim light source. They were human, young, probably teenagers, wearing simple clothes and shackles that glowed with gold technology. One of them looked up as SG. One emerged from the shadows and screamed. Wait, wait. Daniel stepped forward, hands raised in the universal gesture of peace. We're here to help. We're from Earth. We're here to rescue you. The teenagers stared at him with the hollow eyes of people who'd given up hope long ago. One of them, a girl with dark hair and a scar across her cheek, spoke in halting English. Earth, she whispered. The Tauri? But the gods said you were destroyed. That Apophis had burned your world to ash. The gods lied, Mark said, pulling off his mask so they could see his human face. Apophis is no god. He's a parasite wearing a stolen crown. And we're going to get you out of here. There are others, the girl said, suddenly desperate. 2 floors below. Nearly 200 of us, waiting for the ceremony. They're going to put the gods inside us. They're going to take our bodies in. Her voice broke. Carter moved forward, putting a hand on her shoulder. We know. That's why we're here. Can you show us the way? The girl nodded, then hesitated. But there are guards. So many guards. And the Prime, he knows you're coming. He's prepared a trap. Of course he has, Concha said. The false ones always prepare traps. They believe their cleverness can match divine providence. They are always wrong. How many guards? O'Neill asked. 50 Jaffa warriors. Maybe more. And there are 3 minor Goa'uld overseeing the ceremony. They have the hand devices, the ribbon devices. They can kill with a thought. The tactical situation was degrading rapidly. 50 Jaffa, 3 Goa'uld, 200 prisoners, and 1 hour before SG-3's position collapsed. The math was brutal. We need a new plan, Carter said quietly. I have one, Mark said, and felt Khonshu's approval ripple through him. But you're not going to like it. 15 minutes later, Mark stood alone at the entrance to the breeding chamber, his white suit immaculate despite the combat, his cape billowing in the recycled air from the facility's ventilation. The chamber was massive, carved from living rock and retrofaced with Goa'uld technology. Hundreds of sarcophagi lined the walls, waiting to heal the damage the symbiote implantation would cause. And in the center, kneeling in neat rows, were the prisoners. 200 souls about to be stolen. Standing over them were the 3 minor Goa'uld, dressed in elaborate armor, their eyes glowing with parasitic possession. Behind them, 50 Jaffa warriors in formation, staff weapons ready. And seated on a throne at the far end of the chamber, watching with amused interest, was a figure in golden armor decorated with serpent motifs. Not Apophis himself, even Mark could tell that, but someone high-ranking, someone important enough to personally oversee this operation. So, the Goa'uld said in that layered, echoing voice, the avatar of Khonshu finally appears. I am her AK, first prime to the great god Apophis. My master is most curious about you, Moon Knight. A human who claims to serve a true god, who speaks of judgment and divine wrath. How quaint. Mark walked forward slowly, dramatically, giving his team time to get into position through the ventilation. Shafts that Carter had identified. Not claims. I do serve Khonshu, the true moon god, who walked the night. Paths of Egypt when you're parasitic. Ancestors were still, swimming in the primordial muck. Her AK's expression darkened. You dare insult. I dare more than insult. Mark's voice carried through the chamber, drawing every eye. Exactly as planned. I dare to speak truth. Apophis is no god. He's a snake wearing a man's face. And Khonshu, the real Khonshu, has sent me to deliver a message. What message? Her AK demanded. Mark smiled beneath his mask. That your false divinity ends tonight. He threw a smoke grenade that Carter had given him. It detonated midair, filling the chamber with thick, white smoke. The Jaffa reacted immediately, But they were firing blind, their shots going wide. And from the ventilation shafts, SG-1 struck. Carter and Daniel descended on cables, firing zats and throwing flashbangs that disoriented the Jaffa. TLC came through a side entrance, his staff weapon accounting for 3 warriors before they even knew he was there. O'Neill dropped from above with a Marine squad that Major Pierce had somehow snuck through a secondary tunnel, their P-90s chattering as they laid down covering fire. But Mark's attention was on the 3 minor Goa'uld. They'd recovered from the initial surprise and were raising their ribbon devices, the hand-mounted weapons that could crush organs with a thought. Now, Khonshu commanded, let me show them what real divine power looks like. Mark didn't fully surrender this time. He couldn't afford to lose control, but he opened himself enough to let Khonshu's power flow through him, enhanced strength, impossible speed, and that silver moonlight that shouldn't exist in an underground chamber. He moved like light itself, crossing the distance to the first Goa'uld before the ribbon device could activate. His fist, wrapped in lunar radiance, struck the possessed human in the chest. The symbiote screamed and fled the host, writhing on the floor before Mark crushed it under his boot. The second Goa'uld managed to activate his device. Mark felt the telekinetic pressure crushing his chest, stopping his heart. Pain exploded through him, and for a moment he was dying. Then Khonshu's power surged, and Mark's heart started beating again, not with blood, but with moonlight. He pushed through the device's effect, grabbed the Goa'uld by the throat, and tore the ribbon device from his hand. The symbiote tried to flee, but Mark caught it midair and threw it into one of the sarcophagi, slamming the lid shut. The machine activated automatically, and the screams were satisfying. The third Goa'uld took one look at Mark approaching, wreathed in impossible light, and did something unexpected. He surrendered. Mercy, the creature begged, falling to his knees. I am but a minor servant. I have no quarrel with true gods. Please, I will serve you. I will worship. Lies, Khonshu snarled. Kill it. But Mark hesitated. This was a Goa'uld, yes. A parasite. But it was also genuinely terrified. And its host, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, was still aware, still trapped. Mark, O'Neill's voice cut through his indecision. We've got incoming. Her AK is calling for reinforcements. The decision made itself. Mark knocked the Goa'uld unconscious, host and symbiote both, and turned to face her AK. The first Prime had abandoned his throne and was advancing with a dozen elite Jaffa warriors. His eyes glowed with fanatical loyalty. You are skilled, Moon Knight, but you are still mortal, and I have trained for 80 years to serve my god. Then your god wasted 80 years, Mark replied. They clashed in the center of the chamber, staff weapons singing. Her AK was fast, disciplined, and absolutely devoted to his false god. But Mark had Khonshu whispering tactics, his own mercenary experience, and the desperate knowledge that 200 lives depended on him not failing. The fight lasted 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. Mark finally got inside her AK's guard, drove his truncheon into the symbiote pouch, and felt the creature die. The first Prime collapsed, and without his leadership, the remaining Jaffa began to break. Prisoners, Carter was already moving among the kneeling humans, breaking their shackles with a Goa'uld device. Everyone up. We're leaving. Now, the evacuation was chaos. 200 terrified people, most of whom had never seen a Stargate, being herded through tunnels by soldiers from another world. But somehow, impossibly, they made it work. They emerged from the ruins to find SG-3, holding their position by the thinnest of margins. Major Pierce was bleeding from a dozen wounds, but still directing fire. The Marines had constructed makeshift fortifications from ancient stone and Jaffa corpses. About time, Pierce shouted. We're down to our last magazines. Gate room now, O'Neill commanded. Everyone through. Move, move, move. The Stargate activated, Earth dialing in, having monitored their beacon. The iris opened, and the event horizon bloomed like salvation itself. The prisoners went first, stumbling through in groups of 10. Then the Marines. Then SG-3. Finally, SG-1. Mark was the last one through, and as he stepped toward the event horizon, he looked back at the pyramid fortress. Somewhere inside, Apophis would be receiving word that his breeding complex had been destroyed, his Jaffa defeated, and his prisoners rescued by a team that included someone claiming to be the avatar of a true god. He will come for you now, Khonshu observed. This slight cannot be ignored. You have challenged his divinity in front of his followers. He will hunt you across the galaxy if necessary. Good, Mark said aloud. Let him come. Let him see what happens when false gods face the real thing. And he stepped through the Stargate, leaving P7J 989 behind. The SGC gate room erupted and controlled chaos as 200 traumatized refugees poured through the Stargate. Medical teams swarmed in, triage stations were established in minutes, and security forces cordoned off the area while trying to process what had just happened. Mark stumbled through the event horizon last. His white suit scorched and torn, blood, some his own, most not, splattered across the fabric. He collapsed to his knees on the metal ramp, the divine energy that had sustained him through the battle finally draining away. Well fought, my fist. Khonshu's voice was satisfied, almost proud. You have delivered judgment and mercy both. Perhaps there is hope for you yet. Medic, Carter was at his side immediately, checking him for injuries. Mark, talk to me. Are you hit? I'm fine, Mark gasped, pulling off his mask. His face was pale, sweat-soaked, and his eyes were unfocused. Just burned through too much. Khonshu's power has a cost. Dr. Fraser appeared with a medical team. Get him to the infirmary. Full workup, and I want that suit analyzed. I'm reading residual energy signatures that shouldn't be possible. As they loaded Mark onto a stretcher, he caught glimpses of the refugees being processed. The girl with the scar who'd helped them was crying, not from fear anymore, but relief. An elderly man was hugging a Marine, thanking him in broken English. Children clung to their parents. Families reunited after believing they'd be separated forever. They'd save them. Against impossible odds, they'd actually save them. Of course we did, Khonshu said. That is what gods do. We protect the travelers of night, the lost, the afraid. And we punish those who prey upon them. We're not gods, Mark murmured as consciousness began to slip. We're just people doing the right thing. Perhaps that is what gods are, Khonshu replied. And Mark wasn't sure if he heard approval or disappointment in the god's voice. Then darkness took him. Mark woke 36 hours later in the SGC infirmary. The first thing he noticed was that his wrists were restrained, soft restraints. Medical grade, but restraints nonetheless. The second was that Dr. Fraser sat in a chair beside his bed, reading a medical chart and looking exhausted. Welcome back, she said when she noticed his eyes open. You've been unconscious for a day and a half. We were getting worried. The restraints necessary? Mark asked, his voice rough. Precautionary. You were talking in your sleep. Multiple voices, multiple languages, some of which Daniel couldn't even identify. And once, your eyes started glowing silver, and you nearly tore out your four. She set down the chart. How are you feeling? Mark took inventory. His body ached everywhere. But it was the good kind of ache, muscles recovering from extreme exertion, not permanent damage. His mind felt clearer than it had in days. All three of his personalities quiet and separate again. And Khonshu, I am here, the god confirmed. Resting, even. Divine power requires recovery. Time when channeled through mortal flesh. Tired, Mark told Fraser. But intact. How are the refugees? Stable. Most are suffering from malnutrition, psychological trauma, and various degrees of physical abuse, but they're alive. You saved 200 lives yesterday, Mr. Spectre. That's not nothing. Yesterday I also killed at least 15 people. Fraser's expression didn't change. 15 Jaffa warriors who were about to facilitate the enslavement of 200 innocents. I've read the mission reports. You showed remarkable restraint, actually. According to Colonel O'Neill's account, you could have killed many more but chose not to. Mark thought of the third Goa'uld, the one who'd surrendered. What happened to the prisoner? The minor Goa'uld. In containment. The Takare are negotiating with us about what to do with him. Apparently, his host, a man named Tarek, was implanted against his will 20 years ago. If they can safely remove the symbiote, we might be able to save him. She paused. You could have killed them both. Many would have. But you didn't. Khonshu wanted me to. But you didn't, Fraser repeated firmly. That's what matters. You're in control, Mr. Spectre. Not your god. You. Mark wanted to believe that. But he'd felt Khonshu's power coursing through him. Had experienced the divine certainty that violence was always justified against the guilty. The line between Mark Spector making choices and Khonshu puppeting his body was getting thinner. Can I ask you something, doctor? Mark said quietly, as a psychiatrist, not just a medical officer. Of course. How do you tell the difference between doing the right thing for the right reasons and doing the right thing because a voice in your head is manipulating you into it? Fraser considered the question. That's complex. In normal cases of we'd work on integration, helping the personalities communicate and eventually merge. But your situation is unique. Khonshu isn't just another aspect of your psyche. Based on what we've observed, he's a genuine external entity influencing your actions. That doesn't answer my question. No, it doesn't. Because I don't have a good answer. She leaned forward. But I can tell you this. Every time you've faced a choice between Khonshu's demands and your own moral compass, you've struggled. You've questioned. You fought back. That suggests your agency is still intact. The moment you stop questioning, the moment you simply accept that Khonshu's will equals yours, that's when I'd be worried. The door opened and General Hammond entered, followed by O'Neill and TLC. Hammond looked at the restraints, then at Fraser. Is he stable, doctor? Physically and mentally, yes, sir. The restraints were precautionary and can be removed. Hammond nodded, and Fraser released the bindings. Mark sat up, rubbing his wrists. Mr. Spector, Hammond began. I've read the after-action reports from everyone involved in the P7J 989 operation. Major Pierce, SG-1, even some of the refugees we've been able to interview. And I've reviewed Dr. Fraser's medical analysis of what happened to you during the mission. Mark braced himself for the dismissal. He'd gone too far, shown too much power, been too dangerous. They were going to send him home, or whatever passed for home when you'd walked through an alien portal and couldn't find your way back. Based on all available evidence, Hammond continued, I'm officially adding you to SG-1's permanent roster. Effective immediately. Mark blinked. Sir, you heard me. You're a member of SG-1 now. Full security clearance, access to classified materials, authorization to carry gold and Tauri weapons. The works. Hammond's expression softened slightly. You heard me. You're a member of SG-1 now. Full security clearance, access to classified materials, authorization to carry gold and Tauri weapons. The works. Hammond's expression softened slightly. You saved 200 lives yesterday, son. More importantly, you did it while maintaining control when you easily could have lost it. That shows character. That shows discipline. And that's exactly what we need in this fight. O'Neill stepped forward. Plus, having someone who can go toe-to-toe with gold first primes is kind of useful, though you're going to need a call sign. Moon Knight is a mouthful in combat situations. What do you suggest? Mark asked. How about Lunar? Carter suggested, entering behind TLC. Short, simple, fits the theme. I was thinking crazy, O'Neill said. But Lunar works too. TLC inclined his head. It would be an honor to continue fighting alongside you, Mark Spector. You have proven yourself a warrior worthy of respect. Mark felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not Khonshu's rage, or Steven's sophistication, or Jake's pragmatism, but something from Mark himself. Belonging. Purpose. A team that actually trusted him despite knowing what he was. Thank you, General, he said quietly. I won't let you down. See that you don't. Now, there's one more thing. Hammond pulled out a tablet. The TOC RA have sent us intelligence about Apophis's response to your raid. He's not happy. An image appeared on the screen, a gold transmission showing Apophis on his throne aboard a Hatak mothership. The system lord's eyes glowed with rage as he spoke in that layered, divine voice. The one who calls himself Moon Knight has committed sacrilege against my divine authority. He claims to serve a true god, while I am merely a pretender. This insult cannot stand. I hereby declare a blood feud against this avatar and all who shelter him. The Tauri will burn for their blasphemy, and this Moon Knight will kneel before me before I tear out his spine and wear it as a trophy. The transmission ended. The room was quiet for a moment. Well, O'Neill said. He seems upset. He is more than upset, TLC said gravely. A blood feud is the highest declaration of war among the Goa'uld. Apophis will commit significant resources to hunting Moon Knight, and anyone who stands with him will be targeted as well. So basically Tuesday for us, Carter said. We were already on Apophis's hit list. This is different, TLC insisted. This is personal. He will not simply send Jaffa warriors or minor system lords. He will come himself, and he will bring his entire fleet. Mark stood on shaky legs, gripping the bed rail for support. Then I should leave. I can't put Earth at risk because I pissed off a false god. Sit down, son, Hammond ordered. You're not going anywhere. This is exactly what we signed up for when we opened the Stargate, making enemies of tyrants who enslave entire worlds. If Apophis wants to add you to his grudge list, he can get in line behind every other system lord who wants us dead. But, no buts. You're part of this team now. We face threats together, or we don't face them at all. Hammond looked at each person in the room. Apophis has been our enemy since day one. If he wants to escalate because we rescued his victims, then we'll deal with the consequences. Together. Your general speaks with more wisdom than expected, Khonshu observed. Perhaps these mortals understand the nature of war better than I credited. The Takare are also offering support, Carter added, checking her tablet. They think Mark's claim to be serving a real Egyptian god might actually help them. A lot of Jaffa are already questioning the Goa'uld's divinity thanks to TLC's defection. If word spreads that there's someone out there serving an actual god who's calling the Goa'uld liars, it could start a religious revolution among the Jaffa, Daniel finished excitedly. The entire power structure of the Goa'uld Empire is based on their false divinity. If that foundation cracks, the whole system could collapse. Or it could unite them against us, O'Neill pointed out. Nothing brings enemies together like a common threat. Then we make sure the threat is big enough to keep them scared, Mark said. He looked at Hammond. General, I appreciate the faith you're placing in me. But you need to understand what Khonshu wants. He doesn't just want to defeat Apophis. He wants to eradicate every Goa'uld who claims to be an Egyptian god. Ra, Osiris, Anubis, all of them. It's not a military objective. It's a holy crusade. Can you control that? Hammond asked bluntly. Mark thought about the last two missions, about the moments where he'd had to fight Khonshu's demands, where he'd chosen mercy over vengeance. I can try. But sir, I won't lie to you. There will come a time when Khonshu and my orders conflict. And I don't know which one I'll choose. Hammond studied him for a long moment. Honesty. I appreciate that. Here's my answer. As long as you're fighting to protect innocent lives and stop the Goa'uld's atrocities, we're on the same side. The moment you start killing because your god says to, without tactical or moral justification, we're going to have a problem. Can you live with that? Yes, sir. Good. Then welcome to SG-1, officially. Hammond headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Spectre? That refugee girl, the one who helped you? Her name is Shari. She's asking to see you. Says she wants to thank the Warrior of the Moon who saved her people. I'll have security escort her here when you're feeling up to visitors. After Hammond and Fraser left, SG-1 remained. O'Neill pulled up a chair, making himself comfortable. So he said, now that you're officially one of us, time for the team initiation. Mark raised an eyebrow. There's an initiation? Yep. You have to watch Daniel explain something archaeological while Carter translates it into science. TLC makes dry observations, and I make jokes nobody appreciates. It's tradition. I was not aware we had this tradition, O'Neill, TLC said. We do now. I just made it up. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the pain, the knowledge that a system lord was gunning for him, Mark laughed. It felt strange, unfamiliar. Mark Spector didn't laugh often. Stephen did, with practiced charm. Jake did, usually at inappropriate times. But Mark himself? Laughter was a foreign language. You are changing, Khonshu observed, and Mark couldn't tell if it was approval or concern in the god's voice. These mortals are making you soft. Maybe, Mark replied silently. Or maybe they're reminding me what I'm fighting for. Not just to punish the guilty, but to protect people like that girl. To give them a chance at life. Perhaps there is wisdom in that. Perhaps. They spent the next hour talking, not about missions or tactics, but about normal things. O'Neill told terrible jokes. Carter explained her latest weapons modifications. Daniel discussed a theory about ancient technology that went over everyone's heads. TLC shared stories of his training under Bratak, the Jaffa master who'd first taught him to question the Goa'uld. And Mark listened, felt Stephen's personality emerge to banter. Watched Jake catalog exit routes out of habit. and slowly began to understand what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. This is dangerous, Khonshu warned. Attachment weakens resolve. Friendship creates vulnerabilities. You are my fist, my instrument of divine vengeance. You cannot afford to care about these mortals. Too late, Mark said aloud, interrupting one of Daniel's explanations. I already do. The team looked at him curiously. Carter asked, Khonshu. Khonshu, Mark confirmed. He's worried I'm getting too attached to you all, that it'll compromise my mission. And what do you think? O'Neill asked. Mark looked at each of them, warriors and scholars, soldiers and scientists, brought together by impossible circumstances to fight gods and save worlds. They could have sent him away, could have locked him up as too dangerous, too unstable, too likely to explode into divine violence. But they'd chosen to trust him instead. I think he's right to be worried, Mark said honestly, because I'm not leaving. Not until every false god is torn from their throne and every innocent life is safe. And if that means I care about the people fighting beside me. He shrugged. Then I guess I care. TLC smiled, a rare expression on the Jaffa warrior's stoic face. Then you are truly one of us, Mark Spector. For that is what SG-1 does. We care when it would be easier not to. We fight when retreat would be safer. We hope when despair would be justified. Very poetic, T. O'Neill said. But he's right. Welcome to the team, Lunar. Try not to let your god get us all killed. I'll do my best, Mark promised. And somewhere in the depths of his consciousness, wrapped around the scarab amulet, Khonshu settled into watchful patience. The god could wait. The false gods had ruled for millennia. Their reckoning was coming, whether it took months or years. Because Moon Knight had found his purpose among the stars. And nothing, not Apophis's fury, not the Goa'uld's armies, not even Khonshu's demands, would stop him from seeing it through. The hunt had only just begun. 3 weeks later, Mark stood in the Stargate observation room, watching the event horizon shimmer with its usual impossible beauty. SG-3 was returning from a routine reconnaissance mission to P2X 555, and everything was going according to protocol. Everything except the feeling crawling up Mark's spine. Something is wrong, Khonshu whispered. The shadows are too deep. The night speaks of betrayal. Define wrong, Mark muttered, earning a glance from the gate technician manning the controls. Then the first figure stumbled through the Stargate. It was Major Pierce, but something was off. His movements were too fluid, too confident. His eyes flickered with an orange glow before settling back to normal. And when he smiled at the security team lowering their weapons, it was the wrong kind of smile. Close the iris, Mark shouted, but he was already too late. For more figures came through. SG-3's remaining team members, all moving with that same unnatural grace. And behind them, a figure in ornate Goa'uld armor stepped through the event horizon with the bearing of someone who owned worlds. The system lord's eyes glowed pure gold as he surveyed the gate room. When he spoke, his voice carried layers of divine arrogance that made Mark's blood freeze. I am Apophis, the false god announced, and I have come to collect my prize. The gate room erupted into chaos. Security forces opened fire, but the Goa'uld raised a hand device, and their bullets stopped in midair, falling harmlessly to the floor. Major Pierce, or the thing wearing Pierce's body, laughed as he activated a staff weapon that had been concealed beneath his uniform. Lockdown protocol. Hammond's voice boomed over the intercom. All personnel, we have a Goa'uld incursion. Repeat, Goa'uld incursion in the gate room. Mark was already moving, his white suit's armor plating sliding into place as Carter's upgrades activated. He vaulted over the observation room railing and dropped 15 feet to the gate room floor, cape billowing behind him. His modified staff weapon was in his hands before he hit the ground. Apophis turned to face him, and for a moment, Mark saw genuine interest in those glowing eyes. Moon Knight, the system lord purred. The avatar who dares call me false. The mortal who claims to serve a real god. He gestured, and invisible force slammed into Mark, sending him skidding backward. I have waited for this moment. Show me your divine power, insect. Let me see what passes for godhood in your pathetic universe. Mark pushed himself up, feeling Khonshu's rage building like a storm. You want to see divine power? Gladly. Unleash me, Khonshu demanded. Let me show this pretender what happens when false gods face the real thing. But Mark hesitated. They were in the SGC, surrounded by personnel, with civilians in adjacent corridors. If he gave Khonshu full control here, the collateral damage could be catastrophic. Carter, Mark shouted into his radio. We need containment. Blast doors now. Working on it. Carter's voice crackled back. But he's overriding our systems with some kind of Goa'uld code. SG-1 burst into the gate room through the main entrance, weapons raised. O'Neill immediately assessed the situation. 5 Goa'uld hosts, including a system lord, versus whatever security forces hadn't been caught in Apophis's telekinetic field. Okay, O'Neill said. This is bad. Indeed, TLC agreed, already firing his staff weapon at the possessed SG-3 members. The blast caught one in the chest, but the Goa'uld's ribbon device activated, creating a shield that deflected the shot. Daniel was frantically working on a tablet. If I can get to the DHD controls, I can shut down the Stargate before he calls for reinforcements. Apophis laughed. Too late, human. My Jaffa are already approaching. Your precious base will fall, and Earth will finally kneel before its true God. The Stargate activated again. This time, Jaffa warriors began pouring through, 10, 20, 30 of them, creating a beachhead in the gate room. The security forces were being pushed back, their conventional weapons barely making a dent against Goa'uld shielding technology. We're being overrun, one of the guards shouted. Mark made his decision. Everyone fall back. Get behind the blast doors. What about you? Carter demanded. I'm buying you time. Mark looked at O'Neill. Get Hammond to activate the self-destruct protocol if necessary. Don't let Apophis take the base. Moon Knight. Go. SG-1 retreated, covering the evacuation of personnel while Mark stood alone in the gate room, facing down a system lord and an army. It was suicide. It was stupid. It was exactly what Khonshu had been pushing him toward since they'd arrived in this universe. Finally, Khonshu breathed. Finally, you understand. Now let me show you what we truly are. Mark didn't surrender control completely this time. Instead, he opened himself halfway, a partnership rather than a possession. Khonshu's power flooded through him, but Mark kept his own consciousness front and center, guiding the divine fury rather than being swept away by it. His eyes began to glow silver. Moonlight, impossible underground, but real, began to emanate from his body, casting sharp shadows across the gate room. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Apophis's expression shifted from amusement to interest. Now we see the truth. Show me, Avatar. Show me what your god can do. Mark moved. He became a white blur, enhanced by divine speed that made his previous fights look sluggish. His staff weapon sang as it blocked 3 incoming attacks simultaneously. His crescent darts flew with supernatural accuracy, finding the weak points in Jaffa armor. His cape swirled around him like living shadow, deflecting energy blasts that should have killed him. But there were too many. For every Jaffa he dropped, 2 more came through the gate. And Apophis himself hadn't even moved yet, simply watching with clinical interest as Mark fought his forces. We need more, Khonshu snarled. Give me more control. Let me show our full power. Not yet, Mark gasped, driving his truncheon into a Jaffa's symbiote pouch. Have to. Hold back. Collateral damage. Fool. Mercy will get you killed. A staff blast caught Mark in the shoulder, spinning him around. Another hit his leg. He felt a one knee, wounded but not out. The Jaffa began to close in, forming a circle around him. Apophis finally moved from his position by the Stargate, walking through his warriors with the confidence of a being who'd ruled for thousands of years. He looked down at Mark with something like pity. You fought well, for a mortal, the system lord said. But you are only mortal. Your god may grant you tricks, speed, strength, parlor magic with light, but you are not divine. You are meat pretending at godhood. He raised his hand device. And now you die. The device activated, and Mark felt his internal organs begin to crush. Pain exploded through him, white-hot and absolute. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but scream. Now, Khonshu roared. Give me control now, or we die. Mark had 1 second to make the choice. Die with his principles intact, or survive by becoming the very thing he'd been fighting against. A weapon of divine wrath with no restraint, no mercy, no humanity. He chose survival. Take it, Mark thought. Take everything. Khonshu poured into him completely. and Mark Spector ceased to exist as a separate entity. The being that stood up was no longer purely Mark or purely Khonshu, but something else, a fusion of mortal determination and divine fury. When it spoke, the voice carried layers of power that made the air itself vibrate. "You dare," the Moon Knight said, and each word hit like a physical blow. "You dare wear the face of gods. You dare claim divinity while you are nothing but worms." Apophis's hand device exploded. The feedback from encountering true divine essence too much for Goa'uld technology to handle. The system lord staggered back, and for the first time in millennia, fear flickered across his face. "Impossible," he breathed. "Not impossible," Moon Knight replied. "Inevitable. I am Khonshu's fist, avatar of the true moon god, and I have come to deliver judgment." The Jaffa warriors opened fire as one. 50 staff weapons discharged simultaneously, a killing field of energy that would have vaporized a tank. The Moon Knight raised one hand, and the silver light emanating from him intensified until it was blinding. The energy blast struck the light and simply stopped, frozen, in midair like insects in amber. Then the Moon Knight released them, and the blast reversed course, striking down the Jaffa who'd fired them. Apophis activated his personal shield and retreated toward the Stargate. "Jaffa, to me, we fall back," but the Moon Knight was faster. He crossed the distance in a heartbeat, grabbed Apophis by the throat, and lifted him off the ground. The shield sparked and died under the touch of divine power. "You have worn my brother's name," the Moon Knight said, and now the voice was purely Khonshu's, ancient and terrible. "You have called yourself God while enslaving billions. You have perpetrated horrors beyond mortal comprehension, and you thought you would face no consequences." "Please," Apophis gasped. The confident system lord reduced to a begging parasite. "I can serve you. I can worship you. I can. You can die." The silver light intensified until it was impossible to look at directly. Those watching from the observation deck through reinforced glass had to shield their eyes. And when the light faded, Apophis's host fell to the ground, empty. The symbiote that had claimed to be a god lay smoking beside him, burned to ash by lunar fire. The remaining Jaffa froze, their absolute faith in their god's invincibility shattered. The Moon Knight turned to face them, and his voice carried to every corner of the room. "Your god is dead. Your god was never real. Return to your worlds and spread the word. The age of false gods is ending. The true gods are coming, and we are not merciful." The Jaffa fled, some through the Stargate, some through whatever exits they could find. Within minutes, the gate room stood empty except for the Moon Knight, surrounded by bodies and the ashes of a system lord. "It is done," Khonshu said with satisfaction. "The first false god has fallen. Many more will follow." "Mark," Carter's voice came over the radio, tentative and afraid. "Mark, are you still in there?" The Moon Knight's head tilted, as if listening to something internal. Then the silver glow began to fade, the divine presence receding, and Mark Spector collapsed to his knees, gasping. "I'm here," he managed. "I'm still here." But that was a lie, and Mark knew it. Something fundamental had changed in that moment when he'd given Khonshu complete control. The boundary between Mark and the god had dissolved, and Mark wasn't sure it would ever fully return. "We are stronger together," Khonshu whispered. "Accept it. Embrace it. We are the instrument of justice the universe needs." "We just killed a system lord," Mark said aloud, staring at his hands. They were shaking, covered in blood and ash. "We executed him. He would have killed millions more," O'Neill's voice said. Mark looked up to CSG-1 entering the gate room cautiously, weapons lowered but ready. He was a mass murderer on a galactic scale. If anyone deserved execution, it was him. But we didn't capture him for trial. We didn't extract intelligence. We just killed him. Because Conscious said so. Daniel knelt beside Mark. "You also saved the entire base. If Apophis had taken control of the SGC, he would have had access to all our intel, all our technology, and a direct path to Earth. You stopped that by becoming exactly what I was afraid of becoming." Mark pulled off his mask, and his eyes were haunted. A weapon, a tool of divine vengeance. I felt his death, and part of me, the part that's Khonshu, or maybe the part that's been Khonshu all along, enjoyed it. TLC placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. "Then you must decide, Mark Spector. Will you be consumed by the god you serve, or will you master that power and use it for justice?" not merely vengeance? That choice defines you far more than any single act of violence. Hammond's voice came over the intercom. Secure the gate room. Medical teams to the wounded. And someone get me a full accounting of what the hell just happened. As security forces flooded in and the facility shifted to damage control, Mark sat in the center of the chaos, feeling the weight of what he'd become. He'd crossed a line today, killed a major threat, yes, but also proven that when pushed far enough, he would choose divine power over human restraint. You did what was necessary, Khonshu insisted, and you will do it again. This is your purpose, to be my fist, my instrument of justice against the false gods. Accept it. Maybe, Mark whispered. Or maybe I find a way to be Mark Spector and Khonshu both, without losing myself completely. We shall see, the god replied. We shall see. Later, after the debriefing and the medical checks and the endless questions, Mark stood on the surface level of the base, looking up at the night sky through a reinforced viewport. The moon was full, casting its silver light across the Colorado landscape. Somewhere out there, across the galaxy, the Goa'uld system lords were learning that Apophis had been killed. They would respond, some with fear, some with anger. All of them now aware that something new had entered their war. Something that claimed to be a real god and had the power to back up that claim. SG-1 joined him at the viewport. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Finally, O'Neill broke the silence. So, you killed a system lord on your first official month with SG-1. That's got to be some kind of record. Is there a betting pool? Mark asked. There will be by morning, Carter confirmed. The SGC runs on coffee, classified intel, and gambling. What happens now? Daniel asked. The Goa'uld won't ignore this. Apophis was one of the most powerful system lords. His death creates a power vacuum. A vacuum that other false gods will rush to fill, TLC said. There will be war among the system lords. Alliances will shift, and they will all be hunting for the one who killed Apophis. Let them hunt, Mark said quietly. Let them come. Because Khonshu's right about one thing. The age of false gods is ending. And I'm going to make sure it ends, even if it costs me everything. Not just you, O'Neill corrected. We, SG-1 doesn't do solo acts. You want to tear down false gods? Fine. But we do it together, as a team. No lone wolf heroics, no divine suicide missions. We plan, we execute, we all come home. Got it. Mark looked at his teammates, the soldiers, and scholars who'd accepted him despite his fractured mind and dangerous god. They could have abandoned him after today's display of power, could have locked him away as too dangerous to remain free. Instead, they stood beside him, ready to fight the next battle, face the next impossible threat, walk through the next Stargate into whatever hell awaited. Got it, Mark said. Together. Sentiment makes you weak, Khonshu observed. No, Mark replied, both aloud and in his mind. It makes me strong, because I'm not just your weapon anymore. I'm part of something bigger. A team, a family. And if you want to hunt false gods across the galaxy, you're going to have to accept that my loyalty is to them first, to justice second, and to your demands third. Khonshu was silent for a long moment. Then, surprising Mark, the god laughed, a sound like wind across ancient stone. Perhaps there is hope for you yet. My fist. Perhaps we will learn to be human and divine both. Now go. Rest. For tomorrow, the hunt continues. And as Mark walked back into the SGC with his team, leaving the moonlight behind, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Hope that he could find balance between the man he'd been and the weapon he'd become. Hope that he could serve justice without losing himself to vengeance. Hope that somewhere in this universe of false gods and impossible wars, Mark Spector could finally find purpose. The Goa'uld Empire had learned today that the Moon Knight was real, and he was coming for them. But more importantly, Mark Spector had learned that he didn't have to fight alone. The legend of Moon Knight in the Stargate universe had truly begun. And across the galaxy, false gods trembled. The war against the Goa'uld would continue for years after that night. Mark Spector, Moon Knight, avatar of Khonshu, member of SG-1, would walk through countless Stargates, face dozens of false gods, and deliver divine judgment across the galaxy. Some missions ended in mercy, others in necessary violence. But always, SG-1 stood beside him, anchoring his humanity when the god's influence threatened to consume him entirely. The death of Apophis sent shockwaves through the system-lord hierarchy. Some saw Moon Knight as a threat to be eliminated. Others whispered that perhaps he truly was what he claimed, proof that the gold were false and that real gods walked among the stars. Jaffa warriors began to question their faith. Rebellion sparked, and slowly, inexorably, the empire built on lies began to crack. Khonshu grew to respect SG-1, seeing in their courage and determination qualities worthy of his avatar. The god learned, slowly, painfully, that justice and vengeance were not always the same thing. That mercy could be as powerful as wrath. That sometimes, the strongest action was restraint. Mark learned too. He learned to trust his team implicitly, to share the burden of his fractured psyche with people who accepted all his personalities without judgment. He learned that being a weapon didn't mean surrendering his humanity. And most importantly, he learned that even gods could change when they walked among heroes. Together, they hunted false gods across the Stargate network. Ra fell to their combined assault, his solar bark burning in the void. Osiris was captured and the symbiote removed, saving both host and ancient knowledge. Even Anubis, the half-ascended nightmare, would eventually face Moon Knight's justice, though that battle would cost them dearly. But that was for the future. For now, Mark Spector had found his purpose in the Stargate universe. To protect those who traveled through the dark between worlds. To punish those who preyed on the innocent. And to prove that even in a galaxy of false gods, hope could shine bright enough to light the way home. The moon watched over them all, and Khonshu smiled.